Good afternoon. I welcome you to a briefing at the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is the final briefing this year, so we have to close the briefing season today, we can say, but this does not mean that we will not be in touch with you until the end of the year, given that we answer your questions regularly, literally online.
И до конца года, учитывая, что отвечаем на ваши вопросы регулярно, буквально в онлайн-режиме.
Yes, as a matter of fact. And what holidays we had without comments on urgent topics. I would like to start today with a sad, tragic topic.
Прискорбной, трагической.
We are talking about the crash of an Azerbaijani Airlines plane on the territory of Kazakhstan, which was heading from Baku to Grozny. There were also Russian citizens on board. We offer our sincere condolences to the families of the victims and wish a speedy recovery to the injured. The Embassy of the Russian Federation in Astana and Baku, the Consulate General in Uralsk, Kazakhstan, is in close contact with representatives of the competent services of Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and our diplomats have already been sent to Aktau, including to clarify information and organize assistance to the surviving compatriots. We will comment on you promptly. We are in cooperation with our departments, Russian departments, and, as I have already said, naturally with the departments of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. Now one of the announcements. Tomorrow, December 26th, at 11:00 Moscow time, Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov will answer questions from Russian and foreign mass media live. The topic is, of course, the actual problems of international relations, Russian foreign policy, the international agenda. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this is by no means a replacement or cancellation of the final press conference, which is usually held in January. No, it's just a format. We received a lot of questions, respectively, at the end of the year. I want to place the appropriate accents. This is not, I stress again, a replacement for the final press conference, which we are informing you about separately, according to tradition, as we do in all cases with live broadcasts. The broadcast of tomorrow's communication between the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry and journalists will be carried out on the official resources of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on the website, and in the accounts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia and social networks, with simultaneous translation into English, French, Spanish. So connect, watch, and also a number of Russian media will broadcast this interview on their platforms. Well, by the way, one curious detail, when preparing the interview, we invited one of the German TV channels to participate, among other things. However, they did not immediately give an answer. They said that they needed to consult with Berlin. I don't know with whom they consulted, with their editorial staff, or maybe with some other German structures. And of course we were surprised by their answer. A day later, they replied that the leadership of this German media had forbidden its correspondent in Moscow to participate in an interview in such an interactive communication with the Russian foreign minister. What do you think was the reason? The reason was simply amazing: Christmas agenda. It turns out that this German channel, which is engaged in covering, among other things, perhaps primarily international issues, has no questions on international relations right now. Supposedly everything is dedicated to the holidays, and this is despite the fact that, strictly speaking, the communication itself is assumed from the point of view of the Catholic Christmas, already on the post-holiday day. This does not mean that the day may not be a working day, But we are talking about the fact that, of course, this channel broadcasts literally live, and now the current political international agenda. But the news from Russia firsthand from Russian officials, it turns out that the German press is not that not interested, but simply blocked. But not so long ago in Berlin, including German journalists, the Union of Journalists of Germany, the German authorities literally went into hysterics about the revocation of the accreditation of a German journalist. Let me just remind you that this German journalist, had his accreditation revoked by the Russian side in response to the fact that similar measures were taken against correspondents of Channel 1, the Russian Channel 1. Well, first of all, as always, according to tradition, they turned everything upside down, so to speak, and came up with the idea of talking not about Moscow's mirror measures, but about the fact that Russia allegedly behaves aggressively towards German journalists. But it is also surprising that, when these mirror measures were taken against a German journalist, the German official launched the thesis that Moscow allegedly interferes with the work of the German free press. That's exactly in such terms. It's literally a quote from statements. It was all presented. And you can ask the question, but how does Moscow hinder the work of German journalists if it is the German editorial offices that forbid their German journalists to carry out their direct functional duties and work on the territory of our country? Where is this freedom of the German press? Where is this very independence of German journalists if they are forbidden to do their job? But there is another question, less hypothetical, more practical, applied question. If the interview of the foreign minister of the host country, the country of accreditation, is not a significant reason for the German mass media, then what do German journalists do in Russia in general? After all, someone has to answer this question. Against the background of such an absolutely surprising development for the uninitiated, and natural for those people who follow the situation, it seems to me that no one in Germany has any right to accuse us of allegedly restricting the activities of German journalists in Russia. Here is a concrete example of how the activities of a German journalist in Russia were limited to the German editorial office, the editorial office of the German media. Whether it was her decision or this decision was imposed on the German media, I do not know, in the German Foreign Ministry, or the German Special Services, or some kind of separate policy. It's up to them to figure it out. We have a concrete fact. Under the pretext of a Christmas agenda, a German journalist in Moscow was banned by the German editorial board from taking part in a press conference of Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. You know, I can't think of another word for what it's about. We are talking about self-censorship of the German media, about the self-prohibition of German journalists to participate in real, live, non-fictional, but in the form of direct communication media events. This is the restriction of freedom of speech. This is a concrete example of how freedom of speech is restricted, which does not mean at all that a German journalist could not ask some sharp question, or I do not know, maybe not ask questions at all, or ask two questions or, without receiving a proper answer, duplicate this question. This suggests that they are not allowed to participate at all and even hear the truth. Well, here's a concrete example of what we talk about regularly. Now we turn to the situation around Ukraine. Another tragic anniversary date in the history of modern Ukraine, or what was left of it, after the West decided to play with it. 20 years ago, on December 26, 2004, the first signs of a crisis appeared in Ukraine, which today we are already seeing on such a scale, as a result of the Orange Revolution, organized by the West. Remember how they called it then? Handing out orange flags, vests, and other symbolic items. The Orange Revolution. That was when the so-called revoting of the second round was carried out, and, in fact, an unconstitutional coup, in the form of imposing the third round of presidential elections. The legal lawlessness in Ukraine continued, and in the 2014 year, ended with an unconstitutional coup d'etat, and reached its apogee right now in the 24th year, when it was decided not to hold regular presidential elections at all, but to use an overdue one. I can't even say the president, but just overdue. The main thing is to say this word, in the form of a definition, and everyone understands that this is just a verbal adjective. Well, as a matter of fact, what has it all turned into? These manipulations, when they first began in the 2004 year, few, but true analysts said that it would all end badly. Not only for Ukraine in the form of some kind of loss of partial or complete independence, sovereignty, not just for, so to speak, damage to Ukraine's bilateral ties with its neighbors, but that this can lead to fatal results, which is exactly what happened. The Kyiv regime has turned into a terrorist one. With the approach of the new year and the inauguration of Trump, the Ukrainazis have intensified terror against the peaceful population of our country and against the peaceful citizens of their own country, since they call them that, despite the fact that these people no longer consider themselves as such. During the week, the Russian air defense forces shot down more than 500 drones over Russian regions. On the 18th of December, the enemy struck the Kamensky Combined Enterprise in the Rostov region with the help of 6 American operational tactical ATACMS missiles and 4 British Storm Shadow cruise missiles. 8 of them were shot down by an anti-aircraft missile system. 1 was deflected from the target. As a result of its fall, the technical structure of the plant was damaged. In response, on December 20th, the Russian armed forces hit the SBU Control Center and the Luch Design Bureau in Kyiv with the help of high-precision long-range weapons. Attempts by Kyiv and the West to shift the focus of attention from their terrorist attacks to Russia's alleged responsibility for, as they formulate it, damage to the premises of a number of foreign diplomatic missions in Kyiv are absolutely groundless. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Western air defense systems that are unprofessionally used by representatives of the Kyiv regime create problems for diplomats. Russian missiles hit exclusively military targets. On December 20th, the IFU launched a massive missile strike on social facilities in the city of Rilsk, Kursk region, using the HIMARS multiple rocket launcher system. 6 civilians were killed, including a 13-year-old child. 14 people were injured, including a pregnant woman and her 14-year-old son. 17 cultural heritage sites were damaged. Among them are 3 Orthodox churches. One of the most revered in the region is the Church of the Assumption of 1811th year of construction, and 2 monument temples of the 19th century, the Church of the Ascension and the Church of the Intercession. On the same day, the Ukrainian armed forces repeatedly shelled and attacked Gorlovka in the DPIE with drones, wounding at least 2 civilians, and 5 on December 21st. On December 20th, strikes were carried out on a busy area in the center of Donetsk using HIMARS missiles. A woman was injured, and on December 23rd, the Donetsk City Hospital was cynically shelled in Sioux. On December 21st, the Ukrainazis subjected residential buildings and civilian objects in Kazan to a massive attack with the help of 8 aircraft-type drones. 6 of them were shot down by air defense, or suppressed by electronic warfare systems. There are no casualties. This time, even the British newspaper Daily Mail noticed the terrorist nature of the attack. She noted the similarity of these attacks with the 11th of September 2001 in New York. This is how much time must have passed in these 2+ years, almost 3 years already, for the British press to start suspecting something. No condemnation, however, was expressed at the same time. Well, it just looks like the terrorist attacks of the Kyiv regime on what the terrorists were doing with New York at that time. And that's it. The terrorist nature of the Zelensky regime is obvious, of course, by its sponsor. They know who they are transferring money to. They know who they are supplying weapons to. They are accomplices to the crime. In many cases, direct customers. From radio intercepts, the Russian military are receiving new confirmations of the orders of the IFU command to brutally deal with civilians in the Kursk region. All those involved in these other atrocities of the Kyiv regime will certainly answer to the full extent of the law. And now about the punishment for these crimes. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes. Mercenaries from Latvia and Georgia, who took part in hostilities on the side of Ukraine, were sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment in absentia. We are talking about Chris Ansons and Vano Abashvili. Oleg Abdyukov, a militant from the Azov neo-Nazi detachment, was sentenced to 24 years in prison for shooting a civilian car with a grenade launcher in Mars of the 22nd year in Mariupol. Then, 2 civilians were killed. 3 Azov residents, Yevgeny Lavrenko, Dmitry Lysenko, and Denis Fedorko, were sentenced to 24.5 years each. On the 13th of March of the 22nd year, they fired high-explosive fragmentation mines at the village of Agrobaza, DPA. The investigative committee of Russia has opened a criminal case against Brazilian citizen Lucas Ribeiro on charges of participating as a mercenary in the invasion of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region. He was also accused and punished for torture due to the murder of 2 Russian servicemen. They haven't punished him yet, but he will be punished. Now the case is only initiated, and a life sentence of imprisonment was requested by the prosecutor's office for the Georgian citizen Nicholas Buryanidze, who was captured by the Russian armed forces on charges of participating in hostilities on the side of Ukraine as part of the new Nazi Azov unit and killing 3 Russian servicemen in March of the 22nd year in Mariupol during the fighting. The accused, who are in captivity, are taken into custody until the court decision. Criminal cases of mercenary activity on the side of the armed forces of Ukraine have been sent to court against Lithuanian citizens Rimas Armatis and Albertos Glaze Uskos, as well as Georgia's Avtandil Kai. All 3 are on the international wanted list. The law enforcement agencies of our country continue to work to bring to justice coronation Nazis, foreign mercenaries for war and other crimes. We see how the West continues to do everything to bet on the escalation of the crisis with the last of its strength, sparing no one in Ukraine. Western warmongers against our country continue to invent ways to further escalate the Ukrainian crisis, including British Defence Minister John Healey, who, in an interview with the Times newspaper on December 18th, allowed British soldiers to be sent to Ukraine under the guise of combat instructors. He added that London would provide Bankova with everything necessary for, as he said, strengthening at the front, and for negotiating from a position of strength, not weakness." End quote. The media also reported about the transfer of another batch of weapons by the British and Ukraine in the amount of $280 million. The Biden administration plans to announce its latest package of assistance to Ukraine as part of the so-called Security Assistance Initiative. Well, we understand that everything is exactly the opposite. In the amount of $1.2 billion, including air defense interceptors, artillery ammunition. However, as the publication emphasizes, one of the American publications, citing unnamed Ukrainian officials, the decision to strengthen support for Kyiv was made by Washington too late. The rejection of the territory of NATO membership is inevitable. At the same time, the NATO representative in Ukraine, Patrick Turner, in an interview with the Ukrainian Interfax Ukraine agency, announced plans to strengthen NATO's presence in the country in the 25th year. He admitted that in the 24th year, such a presence was arranged. A direct quote in one form or another has existed for 26 years. Turner also said that the so-called new NATO Assistance Center for Ukraine in the field of security. We will talk about this in more detail later. And we are talking about the NATO Assistance Center for Ukraine in the field of security training. And the headquarters is located in the German city of Badani. It is already working and performing its functions. Meanwhile, the media reports that Germany has handed over the East missile system to the Kyiv regime. The NATO countries, as we have repeatedly answered and noted, have long since dropped their masks. They do not act brazenly, they do not act openly. Well, probably the only thing left for them is to simply sign that they openly encouraged the spread of terrorism in the world. For some reason, they didn't do that yet, although everyone understands that without their guidance, without their money, and without their weapons, the Kyiv regime would not have been able to carry out terrorist attacks on such a scale around the world. We know what NATO members are doing. Their purpose is known: the use of Ukrainian territory as a springboard for hybrid aggression against our country. And, as a matter of fact, as a consequence, the redistribution of the world order under its own rules. And they have one rule: they are right. Everyone else does not, and does not have such rights. Such plans and concrete steps by the West and the Kyiv regime have become one of the main reasons for launching a special military operation. We have repeatedly talked about this, and about how and who pays for this bloodshed in Ukraine. At the same time, Washington is fully shouldering the burden of maintaining the Kyiv regime on its wards on the European continent. The very same European Union, which is experiencing increasing budgetary and economic problems, and such existential problems. It is reported that NATO will take over the function of coordinating the delivery of military aid to the Kyiv regime. Instead of the United States, Western countries continue to pull funds from their taxpayers for the maintenance of Zelensky's gang. According to the calculations of the RIA Novosti news agency, from February of the 22nd year to the beginning of December of this year, the West allocated about $238.5 billion to the Kyiv regime. The regime's expenditures for the same period amounted to about $274 billion. That's how much it helps, so to speak, can be judged by the situation on the line of contact, where the initiative is completely in the hands of the Russian armed forces. If Western experts had honestly analyzed the current situation, they would have come to a disappointing conclusion for themselves. All this does not bring any long-term dividends for residents of Western countries, NATO countries. These efforts to continue the military financial pumping of the Kyiv regime only aggravate the situation in the EU countries themselves. The junta's combat reserves are inexorably shrinking every day, and requests are growing. In the meantime, the European bureaucrats plan to keep this very Ukrainian burden for Europeans for many years to come. During the plenary session of the European Parliament on December 18th, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced Brussels' intention to start negotiations with the Kyiv regime on joining the European Union next year. Why is this all? Ursula von der Leyen, who seems to be a resident of the European continent herself, is simply waiting for an answer. In the same way as with American vaccines, which she forced the countries of the European Union to use for huge fabulous money. And in relation to paying for the Ukrainian bloodshed, she is Washington's guide. And he never thinks about the consequences of such steps for his native Europe.
подобных шагов для своей родной Европы.
Europe is being pushed even further into the abyss of endless exorbitant expenses for the maintenance of the Kyiv regime, and the idea of confrontation with our country is being imposed all the time. And, as a matter of fact, people like Ursula von der Leyen are the conductors of this Anglo-Saxon model. I can't help but say, of course, it would be impossible to imagine, but we live in such times. The fact is that behind the words about human rights, about humanism, about standards in this area, which is pronounced by the West, there is no real background, there is no real content. Look, on the web, I mean on the internet, publications continue to appear about the widespread use of torture in Espoo prisons. There are also photos of the consequences of beatings, bullying, well, in particular over the colonel of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine Anton Kvitko, who documented the large-scale plunder, theft of humanitarian aid by the Zelensky regime. It is reported that after knocking out, so to speak, the necessary testimony, including with the help of torture, and tortured him by putting a bag on his head, he was charged with trumped-up treason and allegedly selling to Russia the plans of the Kyiv regime to create a Ukrainian dirty bomb. We will also talk about this further, as much as can be understood by this. The Kyiv Gestapo tried to hide the loud exposure of large-scale corruption at Bankova, which has not been a secret for a long time. Where are all the human rights structures? Well, where are they? Where is the so-called humans' right? Where are the activists from among the Hollywood stars who care about countries whose names they can't pronounce? Where are they all? Where all those who welcomed Zelensky handed him various statuettes, medals, awards, diplomas, where are they all? This is backed up by photographic materials. It's a fact that what is happening in Ukrainian, but I can't even say in prisons, it's not a prison, it's really the Gestapo. Against this background, the mass exodus of Ukrainian citizens continues. Residents are hastily leaving Ukraine in order not to become victims of a criminal illegitimate regime. We see terrifying footage. This is not mobilization. This is the destruction of its own population, what is happening now. And all this against the background of concrete measures, steps and statements aimed at lowering the mobilization age in Ukraine. This is the terrible terrorist, rotten in every sense, essence of the Kyiv regime manifests itself literally every day. Currently, the focus is on the scandal surrounding the 221st Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, where constant beatings and humiliation of servicemen were carried out. There is constant news about a corrupt scheme that has such, an internationally corrupt nature, and schemes that were used between Washington and Kyiv for the supply of humanitarian aid, weapons, material and technical base. All this is literally every day. Like a toxin, it strikes in favor of conducting a special military operation and the relevance of the goals set by it. By the way, we operate with facts. We refer every time you hear, literally in every briefing I say a direct quote. I name the sources. We supplement briefing materials with hyperlinks, where you can go and see documents, facts, figures. Today, I would like to say that another material has appeared, which is literally such a vivid example of collecting facts about the crimes of the Kyiv regime. We are talking about the book by Maxim Grigoryev and Dmitry Sablin, War Crimes of the Kyiv Regime. Direct evidence of victims of the armed forces of Ukraine is not presented. Evidence of crimes of Ukrainian neo-Nazis and their accomplices for the period from the 23rd to the 24th years is given. Do you know what it is? This is a chronicle. It's not just a book. It's not just a collection of materials. This is a chronicle of these years, which describes, and this is very important, because there are testimonies of people who went through these horrors. It describes in the words of ordinary people what the Kyiv regime was doing. This is not the first book in this series. Previously, Ordinary Fascism, War Crimes of the Ukrainian Security Forces had already been published, where an overview was given for the period of 2014-2016 years. A book and Ordinary Fascism were published. Ukrainian War Crimes and Human Rights Violations 2017-20s. Ukrainian Crimes Against Humanity of the 22nd-23rd year. And here's another volume. The Facts of Criminal Acts of the Armed Forces of Ukraine presented in the publication are simply horrifying. These are deliberate killings of civilians, torture, beatings, looting, bombing, shelling, destruction of purely civilian objects, including hospitals, churches. This is not a complete list of crimes committed by Ukrainian neo-Nazis. All the data about these truly monstrous atrocities were collected by the International Public Tribunal and recorded in a new book by Grigoryev and Sablin. Of particular value, as I have already said, the building is being sold because it is based on the testimonies of eyewitnesses and people who suffered from, I don't want to say hands, from the paws of this armed beast controlled by the Kyiv regime. It is impossible to read about what you will see in this book without tears. It is impossible to look at all this. But you need to know this. This needs to be understood and based on the facts. This is irrefutable proof, I repeat, of the correctness of the decisions to conduct a special military operation to rescue people who have been bullied for many years by the regime that was created, so that these bullying, this obliteration of culture, this outrage against law, common sense and morality would continue for many more years, only increasing in scale. Today, our servicemen protect the civilian population of the regions of Russia. They protect the life, honor, dignity of our citizens, our compatriots in our historical regions, in Donbass and Novorossiya, but they also protect the truth there. The one that the world is about to lose when it passes into the stage of the post-truth world. And our common task is to do everything necessary to ensure that all those guilty of crimes are inevitably punished. These atrocities of the Kyiv regime have no statute of limitations, and we will certainly continue to talk about them. And here's what I said. We'll talk in more detail about the work, about the beginning of the work of Germany, the NATO Center for Promoting Security Training for Ukraine. At the Washington NATO summit in July of this year, a number of decisions were made to strengthen support for Ukraine, including the creation of this center. It is open for bidding. The other day, the alliance announced that this direct stat structure has fully operational started its activities. The center will take over the coordination of all Western military assistance to the Kyiv regime, including the supply of weapons and training of the armed forces of Ukraine. Paradoxically, at the same time, NATO continues to deny its involvement in the conflict. Allegedly, the center, according to them, will work on the territory of the NATO country, which means that from your legal point of view, the alliance only helps to maintain the sovereignty of Ukraine, end quote. Well, you know, this is how you can explain everything in principle. And so they explained. And by the way, on the territory of Germany, the presence of concentration camps, ghettos, the destruction of people, their resettlement in a specially designated area for the lower races, was explained to people and residents of Germany itself and foreign observers. We know in Germany historically they are able to explain. Now they are also explaining this. In fact, NATO is getting more and more involved in the Ukrainian conflict, and the creation of special structures that are engaged in military assistance to Ukraine means direct participation in supplying and supporting not just the conflict on the side of the VSO, but now the terrorist regime, which is based on the Nazi essence. What are you going to explain to Germany? What do they justify by opening this center? Or do they think that it is not visible, or no one knows about it? No, we'll call a spade a spade. A coordination center has been opened in Germany to assist the terrorist Kyiv regime, which is based on neo-Nazi attitudes. That's exactly what it's called. Germany went through a very difficult path in the 20th century. She was ordered by the Nuremberg Tribunal to draw appropriate conclusions and work on the errors. Many did so, particularly in East Germany. Moreover, Germany gave a whole galaxy of unique anti-fascist public figures who deeply felt what had happened to their homeland. But not everyone has taken the right side in this story, and in general in history in principle. Many remained in the positions of the Third Reich. They couldn't raise their heads, but now they've perked up. But nothing, both raised and lowered. Now about the situation in Moldova, the Moldovan authorities, with the support of Western sponsors, continue the line of rejecting the neutral status of the republic, enshrined in their own Moldovan constitution, and turning it into a springboard for confrontation with our country. The vector for deepening military political cooperation with NATO is fixed in the updated doctrinal documents of the country, in the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, and in Chisinau. They present the case as if it is only thanks to, direct quote, the developed new modern approach to neutrality and strengthening ties with NATO, that it is possible to preserve peace and a safe country in the face of the non-existent, as they call it, Russian threat. This, however, is not at all surprising because the manuals are old, abandoned, so to speak, like leaflets from the Second World War. Long worked out first in Eastern Europe, then in the Baltic states, now in Moldova. This is the most methodical, and in the 25th year, a new individually adapted partnership program of the Republic with the alliance comes into force. In May, Moldova became the first country to sign a security and defense partnership agreement with the European Union, which has literally become an appendage of NATO. At the same time, Chisinau is expanding bilateral cooperation in the field of security with the members of the alliance, and only this year signed and updated intergovernmental agreements in this area with France, Britain, Romania. Such agreements have been signed with Italy, Norway, and Sweden at the level of the Ministry of Defense. Negotiations are underway to sign similar documents with Germany and Denmark. At the same time, there is an unrestrained militarization of Moldova, the very peaceful, hard-working one that values its culture of Moldova so much. A crazy staging of the whole country is taking place in full swing. This is not even on the military rails, but on the rails of self-destruction. Look, armored vehicles, radars, drones, anti-drone systems, anti-tank grenade launchers. This is all for whom? This is just not a complete list of what was transferred to the Moldovan armed forces this year by Western countries, including through the so-called European Peace Fund. But naturally, we read the official name and understand that the European War Fund is written there. Who is it all for? Tanks with drones to Moldova, those who come to work and work in Russia, those who work and bring back funds and money to their families, to Moldovan citizens. Do these people need tanks? No. They need tools for their work. We need, I don't know, education, food. That's what they need. They need relief from their lives, not aggravation to the verge of self-destruction. Along with the rearmament of Moldova, efforts are being made to turn it literally into a logistics base for supplying the armed forces. That's what it's all about. It is not necessary for the citizens of Moldova. It is necessary from the West for NATO members, and significant funding is allocated to NATO countries for the modernization of the military transport and logistics infrastructure of Moldova according to the standards of the bloc. The landfill in Bolbuek and the Markelstadt military airfield are being updated, and a new military base is being built in the village of Batcha. It's near Chisinau. Information is leaking about plans to locate the production sites of Western defense concerns in the Republic. The basing of F-16 aircraft transferred by the West to the Kyiv regime at Moldovan airfields. The EU's readiness to finance the overhaul of part of Moldova's railway network within the framework of the so-called Solidarity Corridors project. The number of joint exercises of the Moldovan armed forces with the contingents of NATO countries is growing in order to increase their level of interoperability, and this year, the Moldovan army held about 30 military exercises and training camps. With whom do you think? With NATO members. In an attempt to justify the course of rapprochement with the alliance, the Moldovan leadership repeats as a mantra that neutral status is allegedly unable to protect the country. We have already agreed before the statement that only joining NATO can ensure the security of the Republic. Well, the manual is old, the words are approved, the notes are the same. This approach is not shared by the majority of Moldovans, however. Look, according to the results of surveys, more than 60% of the Republic's residents are convinced that the best tool for maintaining military and political stability is neutrality. More than 70% oppose the country's accession to NATO. I would like to remind you that at the end of the 21st year, Russia insisted on reliable legal guarantees of security, excluding NATO's advance to the east and the admission of the former republics of the Soviet Union into the bloc. This requirement fully applied to Moldova as well. We see that the desire of the alliance to come close to our borders by absorbing and developing Ukraine, and now Moldova, remains unchanged, as does the course of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, as they formulate it. These plans are not destined to come true. The remaining minority of the West will not be able to reverse the objective trends in the formation of a new model of the world order, and we hope that awareness of this will come as soon as possible, including to the Moldovan authorities. The only problem is that they are only called by the Moldovan authorities. In fact, they are de facto Romanian and, accordingly, completely Western, not even about Western ones. They are not about Moldova preserving its sovereignty and choosing some kind of, I don't know, you or their NATO-centric model or aspiration. But no, in general, these current Moldovan authorities do not consider Moldova as a sovereign state. They just need to integrate it through Romania into Romania, through Romania already into NATO. Well, somehow attach it there. Therefore, all the actions that are being taken, they are completely aimed at destroying the Moldovan identity, culture, language, identity, industry, by the way, the defense sector. We have already said at previous briefings that the Sandu regime intends to use the energy crisis in the country to solve the Transnistrian issue by force. They categorically place their responsibility on Russia for stopping gas supplies, and they are seriously considering the option of forcibly seizing the Moldovan GERs in Transnistria. Sver spoke about this in detail. It is clear that in such a scenario, the Russian peacekeeping presence in the region will be under threat, and the residents of the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic will literally fall into the position of hostages. And in the end, the escalation of the situation can lead to serious consequences. The emergence of another hotbed of instability in Europe. This is what Sandu is preparing the country for. Why do I have to ask her questions? Because that's why I know. Because it is a vehicle of Western thought. But for what? If she has at least some feeling left for her country. On the other hand, how many times have we seen when people who made fatal mistakes, and then it turned out that it was their deliberate actions against the country, they considered their homeland and were brought to power in order to work for its well-being, literally disappeared from these countries, and turned out to be, well, not I know that recipients of Western grants and salaries, realized themselves on the sites of some international NATO-centric structures, or near NATO funds, and so on and so on. So to speak, they did their destructive work and went for, so to speak, rations, which were promised in advance. And a few words about the building of the House of Moscow, illegally confiscated by the Latvian authorities. Work continues on the legal protection of the property interests of our country in Latvia, on challenging in court the criminal actions of this country, on the raid or seizure of the House of Moscow in Riga. The Constitutional Court of Latvia on December 23rd filed an appeal for gross contradiction of the law on the seizure of Russian property to the norms of local legislation and international law. If someone asks, "Are you naive? Do you really think that the Latvian legal system will make a fair decision?" No, no one relies on it. It is necessary to defend rights at the international level, for which everyone is going through. It is necessary to go through all national judicial instances. The work on the fact of the barbaric actions of Riga is not only on a private legal line. At the same time, the investigative committee of the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation is dealing with this issue. There is no doubt that those guilty of criminal acts, and I remind you, we consider the act of appropriation by the Latvian authorities of the House of Moscow in Riga, the provision of any compensation to the Russian country, as a violation of fundamental property rights. So everyone who participates in this will be held accountable and will be punished as they deserve. In the 25th year, efforts to legally protect the House of Moscow will continue. The use of all available means and legal mechanisms. And, by the way, regarding the rights of Russian citizens and compatriots, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that another report on the situation of Russian citizens' compatriots in foreign countries has been published on the website of the Foreign Ministry. The link will naturally be available in the text of the briefing. We record numerous violations of profits from Russia, discrimination of everything connected with the Russian world in Western states, as a pretext for justifying an unsightly attitude towards our compatriots. The special military operation conducted by the Russian Federation to identify the demilitarization of Ukraine and protect the civilian population of Donbass is still being used, inspired so to speak, although there is a sole root in the word inspired. So I would say, starting from the encouragement of the collective West. But we have a regime in Kyiv, Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and a number of other states are intensively continuing the war with monuments, memorials in honor of Soviet soldiers who died in the battles for the liberation of Europe from Nazism, other areas of the so-called activities of the above-mentioned states to rewrite history and deprive collaborators have also intensified. The authorities of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Ukraine have succeeded the most in Russophobia. They have brought to an exorbitant level, if it can be said a level, their activities to etch the Russian language from the entire educational system, thereby limiting the right of their residents, including citizens, to receive education in their native language. In addition, there is a threat of mass deportation of Russian-speaking residents by the authorities of the Baltic states, and these are absolutely illegal actions. They affected several thousand people, including elderly people who have lived in these countries all their lives, who worked for the benefit of these states, and now they are being expelled from the country. By rapidly restricting education in Russian and introducing various prohibitions, they are trying to literally catch up with the leaders of Russophobia in Finland and Moldova, as I have already said today. International mechanisms are not working. We see that the OSCE is silent. It is silent because the Westerners have blocked everything. Other structures are silent there, including the United Nations system. Special representatives, special rapporteurs are silent. Everyone is silent, but we will talk. And this situation demonstrates that following the anti-Russian policy is now literally an indulgence for the most egregious violations of human rights. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia will continue to take all possible measures to defend the rights of Russian citizens and compatriots. We also intend to continue to record information about the growing number of discriminatory manifestations in foreign countries. And we are doing this in order to, both bilaterally and multilaterally, seek from the leadership of the respective countries to fulfill their international legal obligations towards our compatriots. states. We also do this because we are writing history, so that future generations will know what happened in the first quarter of the 21st century. This, as I have already said, is the chronicle of today, which is aimed at the future. And also these are facts that descendants will use as a support for accusations against those who have destroyed everything related to human rights, morality in international relations, as well as international law. Another wave of speculation about Iran's intentions in the nuclear field has risen in Western circles. This time, the reason was, well, let's say, the careless statement by the Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, in an interview with an Italian news agency, make a statement on December 16th when he decided to openly speculate that, taking into account the available reserves of 60% uranium, Iran, to quote directly, is almost on a par with the countries possessing nuclear weapons, end quote. Well, immediately such haters of Iran of all stripes hastened to inflate this sensation, weaving the mentioned words of the head of the agency into their own conjunctural context, obviously deliberately overlooking the important clarification made by Gross, that weapons-grade uranium cannot be lower than 90% enrichment level in any way. It seems to be an obvious thing for not only specialists, but also for those who, in principle, can somehow be interested in this interview and understand what is written there. But they pulled out what was said separately, dismembered the interview, and it started. Although unbiased observers, of course, understand that such manipulations, which are being undertaken in the hope of exposing the IAEA as an accomplice, and sometimes even the initiator, of political attacks on Tehran, always pursue one goal: to present Iran's nuclear program as the main threat in the Middle East region, which can be fought by any means, up to military force, regardless of the costs, and how it is preached by many, to the last one who lives on this earth. Apparently, a politically engaged, so to speak, Western party engaged in such tricks. These Western screenwriters and directors hope to evade responsibility for the gross violations of UN Security Council Resolution 2231 by the United States and European countries, and the deep stagnation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action for regulating the Iranian nuclear program. Of course, it is becoming more and more difficult for them to do this, that is, to engage in self-justification, because at the UN Security Council meeting held on December 17th, this meeting was timed to coincide with the next report of the Secretary General on the implementation of the aforementioned resolution. All the dots were set, and the root cause of the crisis phenomena of the implementation of the so-called nuclear deal is obvious to everyone. They are connected with the illegal actions of the West, led by the United States of America. The international community has a clear understanding that it was the Western countries that disrupted the conclusion of the restoration agreement, while Tehran has repeatedly signaled its readiness to return to the parameters of the joint plan, provided there is a counter-synchronized movement on the part of Washington, Brussels, and London. Today, it is clear that our opponents have completely different plans. They are far from nuclear non-proliferation, which we will also talk about today. The Director General of the IAEA should take all of the above into account the next time he wants to openly speculate that the spirit of the original agreement with Iran can still be used to accept the status, but the agreement itself is no longer needed. End quote. It turns out that the agency passes sentences on the nuclear deal, but what Gross is right about is that if they fulfill their obligations under the UN Security Council resolution, the very 2231 Americans, Europeans, they just apparently are not going to do it. At the same time, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement, concluded by the Iranian side with the IAEA, remain in force, and now Tehran observes them all. Moreover, neither the treaty nor the agreement provides for any quantitative restrictions on the development of a peaceful atom, provided that all nuclear activities in the country are under the control of the agency. Contrary to Western insinuations, the Iranian nuclear program has been and remains the most verifiable and carefully and intensively checked. By whom is it checked? So it is the IAEA that checks it, as prescribed. And this is evidenced by a huge number of reports. So maybe that's what should have been emphasized in the corresponding interview, Mr. Grossi. We expect that MAGATEC will be able to ensure the objectivity and impartiality of monitoring within its technical mandate, without going into politics, without giving in to the absolutely perverted tricks of the Western camp. And we understand what drives Westerners. We see this as an indispensable guarantee of constructive cooperation between the agency and Iran, with the strengthening of which, in fact, we invariably advocate, including, perhaps not least, first of all, not only because it is the letter of that, the letters and the spirit of what was agreed upon, but we need to look into the essence, look deeper, because these are the true guarantees of security. They are prescribed. They need to be implemented in practice, but not just some political concept. This is an applied view of this problem. On December 18th, the US State Department announced the introduction of so-called sanctions against a number of organizations that were previously subject to restrictive measures in accordance with the European Energy Security Protection Act. For what? Won't you believe it? For participation in the construction of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, but I think this is a prize for achieving absolute absurdity. Usually, in words, they were given, but in one way or another, the sanctions were conceptually justified, especially imposed against those who violate, destroy, undermine something. When it comes to civilian infrastructure, which was agreed upon by the parties, which has a peaceful orientation, is not prohibited by anyone. I think this is the first time that sanctions are imposed on those who built civilian infrastructure against the background of its undermining in the form of a terrorist attack and sabotage. Despite the fact that, as we understand, Westerners are not conducting any searches for those who planned, organized, and executed this crime. A number of foreign, and in particular, Russian companies' vessels, the sequence that Washington allegedly protects energy security in Europe clearly deserves better use, fell under the restriction of Vadim by the decree of Biden, who is on the wane of the presidential term. I say it again, because it's absurd to protect Europe's energy security by imposing sanctions on those who built gas pipelines and absolutely ignoring the investigation of who destroyed these gas pipelines. Even the leadership of the European Union recognizes that for many decades, the guarantee of industrial development and economic well-being of Europe, in particular Germany, as the industrial locomotive of the European Union, has been stable guaranteed supplies of relatively cheap energy resources from Russia. It was for these purposes that the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline was laid by the international consortium in the spirit of long-term partnership. When it was built, was it prohibited by any international norms? Did it contradict the letter and spirit of international legal agreements or norms? No, of course not. One country was really very against it. This is the United States of America. That's who had the Nord Stream 1 and 2, like a bone in his throat. The Americans, showing their imaginary concern, initially hindered the construction in every possible way, has no rights and actions contrary to the existing and national legislation of the European Union countries and international law. Well, I don't want to talk about my own American legislation because everything is clear with it. We have repeatedly quoted senior US officials and the US President and the leadership of the State Department with direct threats against the project. Remember, this was stated by both Biden and Nuland, and then on September 26th of the 22nd year, a terrorist attack was committed on the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 threads. As a result of the explosion, the gas pipeline was partially disabled. Despite the skillfully created obstacles, Russia continues to strive for an effective, transparent, depoliticized investigation of the sabotage, identifying the perpetrators, and bringing them to justice. We regularly raise this issue, including in the UN Security Council. Against this background, the consequences of this line of European states, which are driven by Russophobia, to abandon long-term, mutually beneficial cooperation with our country in the supply of Russian hydrocarbons, literally jeopardized the well-being of the European Union, not as an association. Everything is already clear with the association, namely in a national capacity. Why? Because the notorious issue of energy security has escalated. During the recent press conference of the open line of the President of the Russian Federation, he elaborated on the economic indicators in European countries. This is not some hidden, closed data. This is, strictly speaking, something that, well, it seems like it should have been known in the countries of the European Union themselves, where deindustrialization processes are gaining momentum, primarily in Germany, and in other countries as well. The head of the Russian state has repeatedly stated that Russia responsibly approaches the fulfillment of its contractual obligations for the supply of energy resources, is ready to continue to supply gas, including through the branch of the Nord Stream gas pipeline that survived after the terrorist attack. However, at the moment, we are not receiving signals about the readiness of European partners, primarily Germany, to resume such purchases. Moreover, as soon as the same German media start asking their government this question, they immediately fall not into the lens of their cameras, they fall under the gun. Literally, pressure measures begin to be applied against them, so that this question is why Germany behaves like this, and why it did not maintain interaction with our country, Russia. Why Germany did not ensure the safety of the Northern Streams 1 and 2. And now I'm not talking so much about technical security, but even political. Why couldn't I defend my sovereignty in an existential question for myself? That's who asks these obvious questions in Germany, right there, so to speak, to feel the full force of Western democracy. In the 24th year, supplies to Europe, let me remind you, of Russian gas, both natural and oil, according to preliminary estimates, will increase, well, I say again, as experts say, by 18% from last year's level. They will amount to about 53 billion cubic meters. In the current conditions, this is another vivid confirmation of the reliability of our country as an exporter and partner in energy cooperation. Unlike European politicians and certainly them, unlike their overseas hosts, Russia is aware of the responsibility not only for compliance with its own obligations, but also for ensuring global energy security and make a practical contribution to its maintenance. Now, I would like to tell you about how the two Russian presidencies into interstate associations are coming to an end this year. The representation of Russia in the CIS is being carried out. The concepts of the representative office approved by the President of Russia were set ambitious integration tasks, which were successfully completed. Intensive work was continued to ensure the progressive development of interstate cooperation at the Commonwealth venues. About 150 planned events were held on the international arena, the chairmanship of various levels, including all meetings of the highest statutory bodies of cooperation. A solid package of documents aimed at further strengthening mutually beneficial ties between the CIS countries was adopted. The topic covers the entire spectrum of areas from economics and culture to politics and security. The period of our presidency has been intense in terms of contacts, including through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. 17 Meshmid consultations were held on various issues, including culture, education, sports, the information sphere, countering new challenges and threats, and arms control. The heads of the foreign ministries of the Commonwealth countries met twice, in April, in Minsk, in October, in Moscow. More than 30 decisions have been made that are designed to further strengthen ties between our states. Among them are 5 joint statements, including on such important topics as ensuring security in Eurasia, the inadmissibility of using unilateral restrictive measures in international relations, and ensuring safe conditions for journalists. The texts of the documents can be found on the official website of the Russian Foreign Ministry. We will definitely incorporate the link into the text. Significant efforts of the Russian chairmanship were focused on increasing the economic potential of the Commonwealth countries and the region as a whole, as one of the key factors in ensuring the well-being of citizens. More than a third of the events held in the CIS format had an economic orientation, contributed to maintaining food and energy security, stimulating business activity, eliminating trade barriers, developing the transport and logistics complex, industrial cooperation, innovation, and digitalization. And an important place among the priorities of the Russian chairmanship in the CIS was occupied by issues of security, coordination of efforts of the states of the region to jointly counteract traditional and new challenges and threats. And a significant step in this direction was the approval at the meeting of the CIS Council of Heads of State in Moscow on October 8 of the program of cooperation of the participating states in the field of de-radicalization for the 25th-27th years, which is designed to promote a consolidated policy to prevent the legitimization of radical and extremist movements, building interconfessional dialogue. Special attention has traditionally been paid to building up cultural and humanitarian ties. A number of major projects have been implemented, including the Games of the Future, the World Youth Festival, and the Forum of Creative Scientific Intelligentsia, which were attended by representative delegations from the CIS state. Events of the cultural and youth sports capital of the Commonwealth have been successfully held in Samarkand, Tashkent, Gyumri. A rich action plan has been implemented to hold the Year of the Volunteer movement in the CIS in the 24th year. It is aimed at popularizing volunteer activities, especially among young people. Preparation for the celebration in the 25th year, for the 80th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War, is one of the key priorities of our chairmanship, and at the Moscow summit, the corresponding address of the head of state to the peoples of the Commonwealth countries and the world community was adopted. A single Jubilee medal and the honorary title of the CIS, the City of Labor Glory, were established, and we are determined to continue fruitful work with our partners in the Commonwealth in the 25th year. We wish success to Tajikistan as the next chairman of the CIS in implementing the priorities of cooperation in the format of the organization for the next year, which our Tajik friends outlined in the concept of their chairmanship. But this is basic information, contour information, and of course, we are following the statements that will be made at the highest level. And these results, of course, should be summed up by the heads of our states. Therefore, of course, first of all, we focus on their assessment. And now about the second presidency, which Russia implemented. Now we are talking about BRICS. As you know, it was, in fact, a unique year for the association, because it was the year that passed under the auspices of the expansion of the organization. Since January 1st, 2024 year. The cross-cutting theme of our presidency was the strengthening of multilateralism for the equitable global development of security. This presidency took place against the background of increased tension in international relations, irreversible changes in the entire world system. However, despite these challenges, the role of BRICS as a stable and demanded format of multilateral cooperation, the core support of a new, more just world order, which is based on the sovereign equality of states, taking into account each other's interests, was confirmed. Our strategic partnership has demonstrated that the BRICS is not a tool for opposing the space for cooperation in solving global challenges, existing on the principles of respect for the rights of each state to determine its own path of development. During the year, 250 meetings were held in various cities of Russia, of which over 30 were at the ministerial level. Their agenda covered almost all areas of international cooperation. The year of the Russian BRICS presidency was an important step towards strengthening coordination in the international arena on global governance and the financial system, combating common challenges facing our countries, laid the foundation for further consolidation of the BRICS, expanding cooperation with state partners and countries of the global South and East. The practical implementation of the initiatives of the Russian presidency will serve to strengthen cooperation and effectively address global challenges. The culmination of the Russian BRIC presidency was the summit in Kazan, of course, on the 22nd-24th of October this year. It was, without exaggeration, a significant event in the international political calendar, not only of the 24th year, but also, I think, exactly of the first quarter of the 21st century. 41 foreign delegations, 35 states, and 6 heads of international organizations took part in the meeting. These are the CIS, the SCO, the EU, the Union State, the New Development Bank, the United Nations. According to the results of the Dobrynya media, a substantial Kazan declaration was adopted, in which the strengthening of the BRICS strategic partnership was confirmed in principle and set up. The commitment to improving the effectiveness of global governance institutions and the role of developing countries in making key decisions is reflected. There is a common position on the unacceptability of illegitimate sanctions that are imposed in violation of international law and restrictive politically motivated trade practices. In the countries of the world majority, the summit in Kazan was received with great enthusiasm, and the assessments are obvious. This is seen as an unconditional success, again a general success. Our countries have convincingly demonstrated the absolute failure of unilateral restrictions and the futility of attempts to impose international isolation in our country. We will definitely post more detailed material with a layout on the key events of the Russian presidency on the website today. But I would also like to conclude by saying that Brazil has been taking over the baton since the 1st of January of the 21st year, which has identified the key theme of its watch, strengthening cooperation between the countries of the global South for more inclusive and sustainable governance. Well, we wish the Brazilian presidency every success. Discussions on the implementation of many initiatives put forward within the framework of the Russian chairmanship will of course continue. And one important event, from the 19th to the 22nd of February of the 25th year, the Third Youth Forum Foreign Policy Meetings, in memory of Vitaly Ivanovich Churkin, will be held in Moscow. They are organized by the Gorchakov Public Diplomacy Support Fund. The project is aimed at preserving the memory of the outstanding Russian diplomat Vitaly Ivanovich Churkin. The discussion will also be devoted to the practical application of his foreign policy legacy, the development of research activities of young scientists. The participants of the event are international specialists aged from 18 to 30 years from Russia and foreign countries. The program will include lectures, roundtables with the participation of major government and public figures, leading scientists in the field of international relations, well-known political scientists, historians, and, of course, journalists. And the key topics of discussion of the third forum are the diplomacy of the second track, the so-called tool for creating confidence-building measures aimed at resolving a certain conflict or reducing tension through informal negotiations, challenges to strategic stability, the non-proliferation regime, the situation in the Middle East, the development of artificial intelligence, and the reform of the work of the United Nations. And applications for participation in the forum are accepted until January 12th, and more detailed information can be found on the website of the Gorchakov Foundation. Links will be available in the text of today's briefing. As you know, many people sum up their activities in numbers, and there have been a lot of them today. And then my colleagues and I thought that we also have numbers, we have not only words. Let's go over the results of the diplomatic year, not the diplomatic year, the information year for the Foreign Policy Service. The Foreign Ministry remains the most widely represented foreign ministry in the digital sphere. We actively and around the clock broadcast objective information about our country, about its foreign policy, and do it on more than 12 domestic and global online platforms in 22 accounts in 5 languages. Why do I seem to use exact numbers? But I say more than that, because we are constantly increasing our capabilities and opening new accounts. According to preliminary data, over the past year, our materials have been viewed by more than 500 million users from all parts of the world and regions of the planet. It seems to me that the best confirmation of their demand and the fact that they read us, hear us, watch us, and of course, this proves that interest in Russia's position on key issues on the international agenda is not weakening. All the speeches of the Russian foreign minister in his press conference, our interviews in the briefing, are broadcast live on several resources at once, including the domestic services of Kontakt, Rutube, Odnoklassniki, and are translated into foreign languages. In the outgoing year, we continued to improve the tool of digital diplomacy. In particular, we launched a Telegram channel of the Russian Foreign Ministry in French, which is already being read with interest by residents of Africa and Europe, who want to receive information that is not distorted by Western censorship. The ministry-wide digital network is growing and expanding. To date, all Russian foreign institutions maintain online resources and social networks. The total number of accounts has already exceeded 1,200 accounts. The full list, as you know, is published on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We continue to counteract the misinformation of the collective West. We publish a refutation. We conduct an anti-fake. It has already become, I think, such our calling card. I mean, it's a rubric. We have also supported civil society initiatives in the field of data verification. In particular, they welcomed the establishment of the International Fact-Checking Association. And, of course, a special place is occupied by the very conference that took place and was held under the slogan of Fighting Fakes. It has become international, the second in a row, but this year it really covered representatives of many states, including, by the way, came from unfriendly ones. But of course we provided assistance and actively participated in the conference in every possible way. And we paid special attention to the issues of defending historical truth. I don't think there has been a single briefing where we haven't appealed to the historical truth, defended it from fakes and attacks, where we haven't talked about the most important dates in world history that are relevant to today. And, in my opinion, there was not a single public speech of ours, no matter where we talked about this direct connection of what was happening, and what happened earlier, and what, let's say, unfinished work on mistakes or rewriting history in connection with recent events led to. We pay special attention to the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War, as it is called in the world. We are not doing this by chance, because we see how many are trying to rewrite history. On the eve of the year of the 80th anniversary of the Great Victory, we won't allow it. We will continue to tell the truth about the feat of the peoples of the Soviet Union. We will give facts about the monstrous crimes of the Third Reich and collaborators. We meet in this hall almost weekly. Also an interesting figure. In the 24th year, we had 47 briefings. 5 of them were on the sidelines of the World Youth Festival in Sochi, at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, at the Legal Forum in St. Petersburg, at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, and at the 4th Eurasian Women's Forum in St. Petersburg. Do you know how many questions you asked at these briefings? I'm going to tell you now. I didn't believe this figure myself. More than 1,000 questions have been asked and answered, and you have received an answer to each of them. We are still working with you in such a non-open format that they do not see, but at the same time, it does not become less effective from this. We receive dozens to hundreds of questions and appeals a day, to which we try to respond promptly. Over the past year, the department has prepared about 2,500 comments, interviews, answers to questions that were both posted in the news feed and addressed. I won't even say how many direct answers to the question you get every day. I think that it doesn't lend itself to any figures and calculations at all. And of course, one of the most important parts of our work is the promotion of objective information about the regions of Russia, about the historical and cultural heritage of our country, about its riches associated with culture, traditions, moral values, economic and tourist potential. We are talking, among other things, about the format that has proven itself well. These are press tours for foreign journalists, conducted by the Department of Information and Press, and in the 24th year, there were 9 of them. Foreign correspondents visited Moscow and St. Petersburg, Kaliningrad, Kyiv, Moscow, Pskov, Tver regions, the Republic of Adygia, Mariel, Tatarstan, as well as the Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug, and a separate tour with the participation of representatives of the media compatriots was organized in the Pskov region. It's brief, but it's important, interesting, and I hope it's both useful. I am ready to answer more of your questions. In order to go beyond the figure of 1,100 for 2024 year of questions at briefings, please, is international life with us?
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
Let me congratulate you on your last birthday.
Thank you very much.
Happy New Year and Merry Christmas.
I also congratulate you on the upcoming holidays.
Thank you. And the question is this. The other day, Moldovan President Maia Sandu, during the final press conference, acknowledged a number of mistakes made in the first presidential term. Among other things, she called the lack of dialogue with the population in Russian as one of such mistakes. Is that how you would comment on it?
You know, this is off-scale cynicism, and this, of course, is some kind of inhuman lies, because cynicism and lies are, in general, things related to each other. This is manipulation. We have seen and heard these repentances more than once. We hear and see a similar statement from many politicians of the collective West, and not on camera for all the good, but in fact for the exact opposite. And can I remind you with what slogan, for example, Zelensky came to power, remember, and he was on his knees and beat his forehead, asking for forgiveness for other people's mistakes. So he did his own, not mistakes, but how many crimes? And what did he promise people? What did he promise the people of Ukraine? He promised, first of all, peace, peaceful life, stopping the bloodshed. He promised a peaceful future. He promised the development of Ukraine, deceived in all respects. And the second thing he bet on was that since people speak Russian from time immemorial, that it is native to a huge number, millions of citizens of Ukraine, if not literally said therefore everyone, then there is nothing wrong, but there is nothing strange, that it needs to be protected, and that he will do it. And how he gave an example of his own life and family, where everyone speaks Russian, and has always done it, and will do it. Deceived. Citizens of Ukraine, here's the same thing, apparently. It seems that in Chisinau, they decided to copy Westerners, and those who creep in front of them. Well, if you want, I'll give you straight concrete examples, and you will understand that, so to speak, I have a factual basis, that I can beat all these false statements. Look, on the same day, as Sandu said, she said it on the 19th, in my opinion, until December. On the same day, on the 19th of December, the deputies of the Moldovan parliament, by a majority of votes, adopted in the first reading a bill on amendments to certain normative acts allegedly aimed at combating, as it was said there, electoral corruption. What kind of amendments are these? Let's take a look. They These amendments in particular provide for the introduction of a clause in the Code on Audiovisual Media Services, prohibiting the broadcasting and retransmission on the territory of Moldova of programs that, direct quote, originate from countries waging illegal and unjustified aggressive wars against other states, end quote. There is also such an interesting formulation: if the war is justified, then it is possible. If it is not justified, then it is not possible. But the point is what? It is obvious that this initiative is aimed primarily against Russian-language media content. Russian-speaking, whatever you want to call it. Another example is an updated version of the Moldovan parliament's website. Maybe Sandu doesn't know the truth about this, but I will tell you. Now the website of the Moldovan parliament is presented only on. It seems like yes. Now what language would you call it?
Moldovan.
That's right. You would call it Moldovan. But now it's Romanian in Moldova. You don't forget. Now, once again, the website of the Moldovan parliament is presented only, as they call it, in Romanian. And by the decision of whom exactly did Sandu replace Moldovan? And what about the Russian language? In general, everything seems to contradict Sandu's statements. It's all a monstrous manipulation. It's a lie. Do you understand? This is misleading people. One more fact. 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Health of Moldova, Alena Marinkov, wrote on her page in one of the banned Russian social networks with regret, a direct quote, "The Russian language was imposed on her." And she was indignant at the sowing of Russian speech in the walls of Parliament, which she had not heard in such numbers since the sad Soviet times, as she wrote. End quote. What kind of sad Soviet times are these anyway? Are the fun days in Moldova coming now? I just want to remind you that 80% of Moldovans speak Russian to one degree or another. Use it in everyday life. Moldova continues to attack the principles of freedom and democracy. That's where the sadness should be. The pressure on the opposition continues. You also know nothing funny. On the agenda of the Moldovan parliament, there are legislative initiatives that provide for the complication of the registration procedure of political parties. If they are all accepted, it can only be done with the consent of the pocket structures of the Constitutional Court of Moldova, the Ministry of Justice of Moldova, the Security Information Service of Moldova. Well, what's funny compared to, as they call it, the sad Soviet times? Here I want to cry already. Revanchist sentiments are being actively promoted. On December 17th, the Moldovan authorities once again voted against the General Assembly resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism. Why is this being done? Is this a principled position of the state? No, of course not. This is the very superstructure that was incorporated into Moldova in the form of Sandu of its regime. They make the decisions. No one in the country even knows what Sandu is doing there. Let me just remind you, the document was supported by a huge number of countries. 119 countries supported it. It turns out that yes. And why, by the way? Is it very interesting? Here Minandel Popshoy said, listen, why did they vote against? Those who promote the resolution, the Moldovan foreign minister said, kill children and mothers every day and are innocent of anything. End quote. 119 countries voted yes. It is in Chisinau that they seriously believe that all countries are killing women, children, who voted for the resolution. And in general, how is one connected with the other? No, in general, this is some kind of bracadabra, absolutely monstrous. It would be possible to ask, of course, a question, but according to other resolutions, the Moldovan foreign minister, when he associates himself with the voter, conducts a sample. What position, so to speak, one or another state adheres to? With whom Moldova votes? Is it aggressive? Does it kill someone there? And so on and so on. Is this all done? No, of course not. Because this particular resolution hinders, specifically what it says, that it is impossible to demolish monuments to heroes, that it is impossible to put Nazi monuments in their place, that racial superiority is a prohibited ideology, that xenophobia is bad, that segregation of people based on nationality is unacceptable, and so on and so on. That's what Westerners don't need, including on the territory of Moldova. That is why the authorities in Chisinau are now voting against this document. At the same time, memorials to the so-called Romanian hero are opened with sad frequency on the territory of Moldova itself, again under the direct supervision of the authorities. That's what they said. That's what Romanian activists call Nazi accomplices, who really killed both women and children, and then they got Nuremberg for it. Another artificial heat of Russophobic passions in Moldova suggests that the anti-People Sandu regime is simply unable to offer anything to its society except for the well-worn myth of the so-called Russian threat. That's why they repeat this mantra about evil Russia there and make decisions that are completely contrary to the interests of the Moldovan people. It's not remorse at all. It's show-off and deception. So even if, and then, forgive me, let's just say, here she would communicate more in Russian or will communicate, how then can laws be passed in parallel that restrict Russian language broadcasting, for example? That is, it turns out that she would have removed herself from the ether, so to speak. Therefore, lies are all lies, and there is no repentance, and there is no recognition of mistakes. So, if you have everything with us, we go on and RIA News.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. One question, but before the question, I would like to join you in the congratulations that have already been voiced, and congratulate you on your birthday and the upcoming new year. To the countless congratulations that you have published in your Telegram channel, I would like to add the fulfillment of wishes in the new year, and the multiplication of all that you already have. Here, if I may, now.
You know, come to the question. Thank you very much. I am very pleased. Let me also wish you the same on the eve of all the holidays, when we wish our loved ones all the best. And I can honestly say, as much as we communicate with RIA Novosti, with the RIA Novosti agency, we have really already become closer.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you.
The question is as follows. Kyiv has announced the possibility of creating nuclear weapons in a few weeks. And how do you think such statements correlate with the memorandum signed by Ukraine on security guarantees, in connection with the accession to the TO if Moscow has guarantees that Ukraine will comply with it?
You know, come on, you just had a few theses. Let's go through each of them. The first one, independently, the Kyiv regime, as they say there, cannot create nuclear weapons in a few weeks. This is a fact, period. Second, actually, the Kyiv regime would have to deal with the heating season and not grab for nuclear weapons. That's the priority, to warm and feed people. Third, the only possibility, if we talk about the creation of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, is only if Zelensky's tourist regime receives components important for this work from outside, from other states. And now let's comment on this in more detail. The statements you mentioned are nothing but another manifestation of the terrorist nature of the Nazi regime, which manipulate the topic of nuclear weapons, use her as a threat. And as for the possible, hypothetical, no matter what, well, topic, let's call it that, the transfer of the Kyiv regime of nuclear technologies, then again, the hypothetical participants or hypothetical developers of this scenario should understand the consequences for themselves. Because we are talking about a violation of the non-proliferation regime, well, I would also like to bring you back again, or draw your attention to the statements of the President of Russia, which was made at a press conference on November 28 in Astana. Oh, please excuse me. Yes, indeed. There is a press conference on November 28th in Astana, following the results of the state visit to Kazakhstan and the Stowe summit. In this case, the Russian president said, "We will accept and use everything. I want to emphasize this. All the means of destruction at Russia's disposal. We won't allow that," end quote. I think that everyone who wants to speculate on this topic should proceed from this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is the news with us? Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. We have two questions. The first one, earlier, an American magazine published an article saying that the EU countries would be able to send their troops to Ukraine only if the line of contact was stabilized. How can you evaluate this condition? What will the European military do in Ukraine if the situation is already stabilized? At the same time, the idea of deploying European peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, starting from the 25th year, is actively supported by Macron. How can you assess his role in this process and his benefits from it? We proceed from the fact that any such stuffing is, of course, stuffing into the information space. On the issue of sending foreign contingents to Ukraine is provocative. The goals of these provocations may be different, but in form, of course, and in fact, it is a provocation. I think this time it was a desire to aggravate the already tense situation around the Ukrainian crisis. Why? Because the voices of those who talk about peace, who talk about a political and diplomatic settlement, who talk about negotiations, are being heard more and more strongly, powerfully, resonantly, including in NATO countries. Something must apparently be opposed, so to speak, by the Western War Party to these conversations and this proposal. So they begin, so to speak, to start public opinion, to throw in similar topics. I would like to remind you that any part of the peacekeeping forces in any conflict presupposes the consent of all participants, all parties involved in it. There is also a corresponding decision of the UN Security Council (NU). None of this at this stage is not that there is not, but has not even been discussed. And we do not see any steps of the Kyiv regime that would be aimed at finding ways to resolve this situation. Exactly the opposite. As you can see, the previous issue was related to the creation of nuclear weapons and other aggressive attacks by the allegedly Kyiv regime in the shortest possible time, if they want it. Besides, I don't even comment on the insults that are carried every day from Zelensky, but here the person is already in an absolutely inadequate state. I think that specialists in federal mysticism, but I can tell from Zelensky's physiognomy, also understand this. Therefore, there are no steps aimed at finding ways to resolve this situation, I mean the Kyiv regime. Zelensky and his gang have a priority in obtaining some additional weapons, money, and military equipment from the United States and their allies. They do not hide the purpose of the continuation of hostilities either. Let me remind you that the ban has not been lifted, and there are no moves in this direction to conduct peace negotiations. I am referring to the very ban of the Kyiv regime, which was adopted, so to speak, under pressure from the United States. By the way, they are also echoed by the head of the so-called Eurodiplomacy, Kaja Kallas. She picked up the anti-Russian baton at the barrel. In particular, she is convinced that peace, I repeat, is allegedly what the European diploma says. It is premature to talk in Ukraine, and, according to her, a direct quote, any attempts to promote early negotiations, from the point of view of Kallas, would be a bad deal for Ukraine. In other words, they believe that a peaceful settlement is a bad deal for Ukraine. But we have already understood this, because the desire to wage war in Ukraine to the last Ukrainian in the West is manic, with the lack of movement towards the negotiation process. She also connects the unwillingness of the European Union to discuss the topic of peacekeepers. Well, at the same time, I would like to note that the question of the hypothetical deployment of foreign military units in Ukraine is still a question, You need to understand, and the domestic political agenda in a number of Western states, and France is definitely no exception in this case. You know that the foreign policy, unfortunately, of Paris in recent years could be formulated everywhere and nowhere, about everything and nothing, chaotic statements, opposing theses to each other. Why is this being done? Well, probably a distraction from the socio-economic problems in their own country. Perhaps a desire to declare themselves as a world power. In the absence of concrete achievements, the status needs to be maintained in some way. And how can it be maintained if, as a permanent member of the Security Council, France has fully solidified from the position of Washington and Paris? Where are the initiatives? That's how coming up with such formulations seems to come out with some initiatives, but it does not bring implementation in practice. Thank you. And our second question. There was information in the media about the detention of the Australian mercenary Jenkins by the Russian military in the slow zone. How can you comment on this? Yes, I can confirm that the Australian side has indeed approached us on this issue, and currently, information about the detention and about the detained Australian citizen is being checked. We are monitoring this situation together with the competent authorities. If there are facts to share, we will definitely do it. I would like to emphasize something in this regard about what happened. If this information is confirmed, then of course official Canberra is to blame for everything. And why? Because it condones Australian mercenaries who are fighting on the side of the Kyiv regime. And, unfortunately, so far we have to state that this trend is not subject to any change. It is impossible to say that, so to speak, the hostile position of the Australian political establishment towards Russia can somehow be reformed. Canberra obediently follows in the wake of the Russophobic course of the collective West. And now let's look at Australia's contribution to supporting the Kyiv regime in concrete figures. $600 million. Of these, $500 million, just imagine, more than $500 million, $600 million. And if we talk about military aid, it didn't take $500 million. Out of these $600 million, $500 million is military aid. What did this military assistance lead to? Of course, we take the word in quotation marks. We also see the destruction of Ukraine, the murder of a colossal number of Ukrainian citizens, and so on, and the current Labour government of Albanese, as well as the previous Liberal National Cabinet of Morrison, firmly stand on such a Russophobic position, regularly confirm their loyalty to any instructions that come from Washington. Captured foreign mercenaries, I'm talking about this now in the context of a specific situation, and in general they will be responsible. We regularly inform you not only about the crime of mercenaries, but also about punishments. They are responsible in accordance with Russian law, especially in the case of involvement in atrocities against civilians. And to be honest, I want to convey the following question to Canberra there. Didn't the Australian authorities think that if out of $600 million, $600,000 million, $600,000 million, now, if out of this amount, I don't know, they would allocate a couple of thousand or several tens of thousands of dollars to create conditions for training, work, creating jobs for those who have chartered as mercenaries of their own citizens.
Создание рабочих мест для тех, кто зафрахтовался в качестве наемников своих собственных же граждан.
If this money had been used for these purposes, maybe it would have been more profitable for Australia. I say again, 600,000 already, you know, already in numbers, just even remembered. Once again, these are just such fantastic amounts that it is impossible to imagine. One more time, $600 million were allocated, not even 600,000, but $600 million. I misspoke, because every time you ask yourself the question, are there really such numbers? You think, well, it can't be, No, indeed, $600 million was allocated by Australia, but was it really impossible to spend a couple of percent of this amount on their own development, so that their own citizens would not be chartered abroad, in the absence of the opportunity to realize their potential in their own country? That's the question I'd like to ask in Canberra. I think this question is being asked by a lot of Australians who have seen in the footage. Yes, these shots require confirmation of what we are doing now, but we saw our fellow countrymen, our compatriot, and they can't understand in any way, but how could this happen? So it didn't happen in one day. It's how many years Australia, under the yoke of the United States, has been engaged in promoting the formation of these mercenary contingents from its citizens, who for some reason go to another part of the world, and there who dies, who becomes the object of the application of national legislation, given the crimes they committed. Once again, just think about it, $600 million was spent by Australia to support the war in Ukraine. What is the result? Destructive for Ukraine and destructive for their own Australian citizens. I apologize for this slip of the tongue. You understand. I see how I don't know. Western countries collect a penny there for some charitable purposes, how they try to scrape together questions there, or are greedy to the point that they don't allocate money there at all on the environmental agenda, how they sequester budgets related to culture, education, as they believe they have accomplished a feat, when there, I do not know, a couple of million were sent to support developing countries. How they are launching a whole campaign on, so to speak, the problems of food security, as if advocating for the fight against hunger on other continents. And then suddenly such colossal sums that go not for life, but for death. And that's why every time you ask yourself the question, but it can't be, it's a huge amount of money. Well, yes. Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. Thank you. Let's look for a new year. Happy New Year to you too. Thank you. So, is the Rush Today TV channel with us?
Hello, thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. First of all, let me.
Yes, hello.
Our entire team wishes you a happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
I wish you good health, happiness, and fulfillment of desires and goals.
I can answer you right away. Thank you for your congratulations. I congratulate you too. And I see how additions are literally happening in your family. I mean in the family of Rush Today. How many interesting projects do you have? How do you increase the broadcast grid? Therefore, I also congratulate you on such achievements. I congratulate you on the upcoming holidays and wish you strength and especially, well, congratulations for everyone, but it is especially important for you. This, of course, is the fight against that inhuman aggression and inhuman hatred, which, so to speak, the Western mainstream expresses against you, so to speak. These are both Western regimes and, unfortunately, part of civil society. And in general, what is incomprehensible to the mind, there are also so-called colleagues in the shop who have launched a whole campaign of harassment against Rush Today. Therefore, you also have the strength to overcome this. In many cases, it is harder for you, because you are truly on this very information front line. You just declared war.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the question? 2024 year was, of course, the year of wars and conflicts. Unfortunately, a large share of all this that is happening in the region has fallen on the Middle East. While us President-elect Donald Trump has promised to invest with the rings of everything, as he calls chaos in the Middle East. Many politicians, residents of the Arab world, are responsible for what is happening in the region on your plan. How does Moscow assess what is happening there in the region, and especially the role of the United States of America in the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis? And also,
You have so many questions. Wait, let's take it in order. So the first question is related to that.
how does Moscow assess the US role in the Palestinians in the Israeli conflict?
Yes,
For whom to designate?
I get it. Yes. Do you understand what's going on? This role, if you look at it, it is segmented. It is of different quality. Why? Because different administrations came. There were different ideologies of attitude to the situation in the Middle East. Many had just opportunistic interests. Someone used the situation in the Middle East as part of electoral interests. Someone had purely commercial views. Someone had, so to speak, interests related to national identification. Someone simply lobbied for one or another, so to speak, philosophy. In other words, many representatives of various administrations had their own course. Unfortunately, they were all dominated or united in spite of everything, in many respects by disregard for international law, and in many ways by the desire to squeeze out of the process the international mediation efforts that were created and approved on international legal bases. Well, in particular, the quartet, or you can also add there that a lot was connected with the fact that a number of American political figures in power did everything to somehow blur the decisions of international conferences related to the settlement of the situation in the Middle East. Although these decisions of international conferences again, they were generally recognized as parties to the conflict, or, so to speak, mediators, or the international community as a whole expressed support for them. That's what unites us. But there is, relatively speaking, a test word. There is such an expression as a test word. The United States of America is extremely active in the region. Moreover, some specific countries, specific points on the map of the Middle East, are literally, so to speak, the place of attraction of the efforts of the United States of America. Just look. Has it become better there? Has financial security become more economically stable there? Has it become safer in every sense? And you will answer this question yourself. No, maybe once, there I do not know. In some year, many years ago, there was some positive example. In recent history, if we take 25, 30, 35, 40 years, I will not give such examples. Perhaps you know about them. I don't know anything about them. Wherever the United States of America has visited the Middle East region with the desire to solve this or that issue alone, or apply its best practices, on the contrary, new hotbeds of conflict, tension, and sometimes just bloody confrontation have appeared.
Maria Vladimirovna, what is your position regarding the Israeli-American efforts to finally resolve the Palestinian issue and the rejection of the creation of a Palestinian state?
Well, you know, it seems to me that even the very use of the expression "the final solution of some issue" reminds us of the worst practices of the West. Yes, we perfectly remember who tried to finally solve whose question. This was the Third Reich, which solved, for example, definitively, as it was formulated, the Jewish question. This led to the Holocaust, to genocide, to the destruction of a huge number of the Jewish population, and not only Jewish. Because, so to speak, in the heat of solving one issue, the Nazis began to solve the issues of all the others. This led to a catastrophe that almost destroyed our civilization, Russians. And now we see how the West is trying to finally solve the Russian question, the question of Russia, the question of the Russian-speaking population, the Russian world. They openly talk about it. They unleashed bloody conflicts in Ukraine, just pitting Russians, Ukrainians, Russian speakers against Russian speakers. They held a number of events to supposedly, well, as they said, the destruction of Russian culture and the isolation of our country as a whole. This is what we understand both in the historical context and based on their direct statements. In particular, remember what George W. Bush said, that the task of Ukrainians is to kill as many Russians as possible. This is the concept that is once again applied to solve a particular issue definitively. Therefore, in this sense, I don't even want to think that the concept of a solution, the final solution of any issues, is being applied again, especially the Palestinians, in which they got really just made a victim of a huge number of political ambitions and political mistakes and crimes.
Которых действительно просто сделали жертвой огромного количества политических амбиций и политических и ошибок и преступлений.
Therefore, I want to say again, it is impossible to even formulate the question in this way. Well, you just can't build words in the context of this situation like that. Otherwise, we will see connotations with other historical events. There is an international legal basis. There is a Security Council resolution. There are mediation efforts. There are certainly national interests in ensuring security, but no attempt to historically solve someone's national question, to finally solve someone's national question, has brought the ideologists of these concepts to good.
If I may, Netanyahu threatened major military operations in Yemen, and the head of Masada recommended hitting Iran. What does Russia think about this aggravation of the situation? Whether, in his opinion, there are ways to de-escalate the situation and prevent the descent of a full-scale war.
But we have seen and heard how these concepts of a direct strike on sovereign states, in particular on Iran, on other countries, periodically arose. A number of these concepts were implemented, a number was postponed, but then I asked him a question. He is not hypothetical. Somewhere, and the implementation of these concepts led to an improvement in the situation. I don't recall, but there are no such examples. Do you understand? Therefore, in this case, then, it seems to me to the West, which may be, I don't know, obsessed with this single concept, as from their point of view it works. Maybe they should look at the situation they have created in the Middle East region, and how they tried to influence the situation in Ukraine through provocations and a power component, so to speak. Maybe they should draw some conclusions and work on their own mistakes before starting to destabilize further, so to speak, by mastering more and more space in this way. You just need to see that it has not been possible to improve the situation anywhere.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the star with us?
Yes. Yes, hello.
Yes, hello.
Maria Vladimirovna, you look great. I wanted to join.
I really can't see you. This.
Excuse me.
An anonymous compliment, but I believe you.
Thank you. Today there is simply no technical possibility with a camera. I also join the congratulations of my colleagues.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to those who have passed you. Stay still in favor for everyone, for us, and for the country. A question, if possible, about Zelensky and Robert Fitz. Let me remind you that some time ago Zelensky admitted that he offered Fitz money for Slovakia to approve Ukraine's accession to NATO. I remind you that we were talking about the sum of 500 million euros from frozen Russian assets. You spoke earlier about Australia, and $600 million here is, in my opinion, also quite a lot, to put it mildly. The question for you is, how can you assess Zelensky's actions in this situation? And will he try to do the same with other European politicians? Thank you.
You know, I have seen and heard a lot of things, including the use of commercial proposals in international relations. Well, I do not know. They offer, for example, conflict resolution based on some business models, that is, promising investments, in exchange for giving up some claims. In other words, they are trying to bring it out through, well, for example, the humanitarian component. Yes, so to speak. There are different models, and many of them work. But this, you know, direct boorish, insulting statement to the head of another state, from the side of this one, is not in the Minko, so to speak, which Zelensky has become. I honestly speaking of, I haven't heard anything like that. Again, if we are talking about statesmen, but on the other hand, Zelensky is no longer the president. He does not have such powers. Why is this happening? Of course, because he, Zelensky, is inadequate. And first of all, it is inadequate for a combination of factors. His addiction is narcotic, which has already become obvious, not because it is the intelligence of some special services, some countries and so on, but because everyone can already see by the pupils, eyes, and facial expressions. And the second is his morbid ambitions, which were nurtured and which were, well, relatively speaking, I don't know there, increased to the category of absolute morbidity with Western curators. These two components make it absolutely inadequate, and accordingly, its statements also make it inadequate. But there is another reason why Zelensky appealed to fits like that, offered money like that, and so on. He measures by himself. He believes that since he himself took and takes money, and since it was done before him, in particular on his banking environment, and continues to do so, before him, previous figures on Bankovid did it, then so does everyone else. He is absolutely sure of it. Corruption in Ukraine is a scourge recognized by everyone. In the West, they openly say that, well, it's impossible. It's not about theft anymore. It's already about. Here, there is a concept in the West that the state sponsors terrorism, but there is either a state supporting terrorism or, so to speak, a terrorist state. It's different for everyone. And now, in my opinion, there is, or should be, an additional concept of the state in the context of Ukraine, a corrupt official, introduced into circulation by the same Westerners. And here, if we are talking about Bankova, everything has generally stuck together and joined together. The state or regime is terrorist, and the regime is corrupt. It's all united, so to speak, and closed on the figure of Zelensky. He really believes that since he lives, and since the political party has been living in Ukraine for many years on Western money, everyone else can, should, or live like this. Therefore, it is in its purest form, in my opinion, something from the depths of the subconscious. He just believes that such a format of communication is possible with world leaders, but it was done with him. In parallel, after all, he led himself and his West to this, put him on a pedestal, and if, as the West tells him, he is a world-class star of the political firmament of the universe, then it means it's right to sell for money and sell his state and sell national interests, Zelensky believes. Here he is from these supposedly heights, but in fact depths, and conducts a dialogue with everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and happy holidays to you too.
Yes.
So, the Media Corporation of China. Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna, we are with you. And first of all, of course, I would like to join the kind congratulatory words of my colleagues. With your personal new year coming, with the upcoming 2025 I wish you all the best. And we have two questions today. Come on. So, recently, the Group of Friends of the World on the Ukrainian Crisis held a regular meeting in New York, where representatives of 17 countries of the Global South, such as Brazil, Algeria, China, took part, but not only. We both jointly assessed the latest situation and discussed the further development of the crisis. And the question is, do you think the countries of the Global South can now play a constructive role in conflict management? You know well, we always emphasize the sincere desire of the participants of the world majority to really have such a special role, not in terms of exclusivity, but in terms of practical application of the role in the settlement of various world situations. We have seen many examples of how representatives of various countries of the Global South, the world majority, proposed various concepts, philosophical views on the situation around Ukraine, put forward initiatives of proposals. Every time we thanked them for this, but most importantly, we emphasized a constructive attitude, because they talked about the need to achieve peace and settlement, unlike the West, which has been drowning in this most aggressive rhetoric all these years. In other words, the contrast was so obvious, and we drew the appropriate conclusions that, on the one hand, the West, which for some reason appropriated to itself the right to be the leaders of, as they say, the free world, was absolutely not free, and just propagandized unfreedom for others. Because the continuation of the bloody confrontation is not when we are talking about a fair struggle, and when it comes to, so to speak, a struggle sponsored from the outside, there is no question of any freedom. And we have seen the countries of the Global South, which many of them have been dependent colonies, oppressed for hundreds of years, and how the West denied them even an understanding of freedom, how they showed this freedom from Western pressure, and spoke openly about it. Freedom for peace. And if we talked about the struggle, it was about the struggle for peace. We have always seen this, and have always stressed it. We have always been grateful, and not only grateful, but we have shown respect for such determination, for such foresight. This is a long-suffering determination and foresight. Therefore, it has always been characterized in this way. Now, as for the group of friends, we really note and see the sincere desire of the members of the group of friends to also make a constructive contribution to the political and diplomatic settlement of the Ukrainian conflict. We also saw the press release following the meeting of the group of Friends for the Peaceful Settlement of the Ukrainian Crisis on December 18th. There, in this press release, this material contains a number of important points. In particular, it mentions the need to take into account, as it was formulated, the legitimate concerns of the parties, which implies, among other things, taking into account Russia's interests in the field of security. Of course, the work of the group will continue in the future, and how it will be implemented, how it will look in practice. Of course, this should show time and, so to speak, a concrete return. Today, its participants demonstrate a view on the solution of the Ukrainian crisis, precisely to Zelensky's alternative dead-end formula. This indicates that the ultimatum, unilateral, aggressive, escalation-oriented approach of the Kyiv regime and the West does not find understanding in the countries of the Global South. In other words, they initially talked about this, offering various initiatives, and now implementing, so to speak, the functions assumed within this group. They also profess a similar approach. And we hope that the members of the group of friends in their future work will consider ways to eliminate the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis, on the basis of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations in their entirety, totality, interrelationship. By the way, the representative of the People's Republic of China also spoke about this. Thank you very much. We have another question. Recently, the first batch of American Abrams tanks, previously purchased in Taiwan, arrived on the island. And also on December 20th, Joe Biden announced the allocation of military aid to Taiwan for $571 million. That's not all. On the same day, the U.S. Department of Defense announced that the State Department approved the sale of weapons to Taiwan for another $295 million. How do you assess such recent actions by Washington? Well, I would still build an answer to your question in two parts. First, I would repeat our principled position on the Taiwan issue. It is well known, it is unchangeable. It has been repeatedly enshrined, in particular in documents at the highest level. We proceed from the fact that there is only one China. The government of the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government representing the whole of China. Taiwan is an integral part of China. In addition, Moscow and Beijing consistently support each other on issues related to the protection of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and close cooperation in the field of security. As for new supplies, this is certainly a related topic, but it is of course another component that characterizes, first of all, the West and its true aspiration. So the new arms supplies to Taiwan by the United States is a gross hypocritical violation of the internationally recognized, including by the Americans themselves, One China principle. What these actions are fraught with is also clear. They are fraught with dangerous loosening of the situation in the Taiwan Strait and in the region as a whole. It seems that Washington is literally deliberately adding fuel to the fire in order to play with this fire in the future. Again, tactics worked out in other parts of the world, worked out by the Americans, have been practiced for decades, including in Ukraine, when they tried to turn it into anti-Russia, to use it as a tool. There are a lot of places where the Americans have used this tactic with nuances, with details, but they have already applied it. Here's another example. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lee Reuter is with us.
Vladimir, good evening. We are with you. I take this opportunity to join in the congratulations.
A colleague, thank you very much. I also congratulate you on the upcoming holidays. Stay with us.
Thank you. And I would like to ask you two questions. In 2026, here in 2026 year, the START 3 treaty expires. And just last week, the first Deputy National Security Advisor to the US President, John Feiner, said that Washington is ready to continue contacts with Russia to maintain strategic stability, and is set to discuss measures to control nuclear weapons without preconditions. Here is whether Moscow is ready for such contacts, and, in principle, is considering for itself in the current conditions the possibility of concluding a treaty that could replace START 3.
As you know, we see absolutely nothing new in the words of the American official you mentioned, when compared with other similar statements that were previously voiced by representatives of the outgoing administration, and, accordingly, were commented on with us. The Russian side has repeatedly responded to such visits. Let me remind you, and by the way, it was given both through diplomatic channels and publicly. It was also given at the highest level. The Russian consistent position has not changed in this case. Separating the issues of arms control from the current military political realities is unacceptable for our country. Stating on the one hand the intention, as it is formulated there, to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. On the other hand, Washington's readiness to discuss ways to maintain stability deprives a hypothetical dialogue of both a semantic and a digestible basis. You know, this, in my opinion, resembles some kind of dichotomy, really. Perhaps the states have such sadomasochical clients, but let them develop this topic with them in this way, or other topics in this way. But definitely not to us, returning to the fact that these calls are coming from the outgoing administration. I would also like to question the very wording of the question in general. Well, how can you seriously or hypothetically discuss or reason on serious very important life-changing topics, and speak or comment on the statement of those who will be there in a couple of days, probably for a couple of days there, yes, will not be at their posts in their offices in Washington.
Не будет на своих постах, в своих кабинетах в Вашингтоне.
As we have seen more than once from the experience of US relations, the arrival of a new administration entails at least a significant, and sometimes just the opposite, radical approach of the American country to strategic stability, arms control, and on many other topics. We also saw a 180-degree turn. Therefore, it seems to me that we need to proceed from this.
And if I may, the second question concerns the upcoming January European tour. The special envoy of US President-elect Donald Trump on Ukraine, Nikita Kelig, who plans to visit a number of European capitals. And some sources say that Moscow may be on the list of these capitals. Did Russia have any contacts with the Trump team through diplomatic channels in light of Kelig's planned trip to Europe?
I will say right away clearly, unequivocally, so that there is no way to interpret it in any other way. There were no contacts. If you have any other questions about this, let's also discuss them. Because they ask questions in different connotations. And did you communicate with representatives of the incoming administration? And through what channels? Everything that is possible has already been thrown in, considered, and so on. I would like to draw your attention to the Otsin once again, not just on the assessments, but on the statements that were made by Yuri Viktorovich Ushakov. They are also relevant at the moment regarding the fact that there are no contacts with the Trump team through diplomatic official channels. In this very transit period, when, so to speak, there will be a change of power, when, so to speak, appropriate appointments will be made, and so on, then it will in principle make sense to comment on it in general. I would like to draw your attention once again to the fact that representatives of the presidential administration have repeatedly talked about this in detail. All this is relevant at the moment.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Lean News is with us. Ru.
Maria Vladimirovna. Hello. Portal less than Earl greater than, and Pavel Vorobyov, we are with you. We also congratulate you on your last birthday.
Thank you.
We wish you all the best, and, of course, good health.
Thank you.
We have two questions for you today. The first question is this. Donald Trump said that he expects to meet with his Russian counterpart in the near future, respectively, with our Vladimir Putin. Do you think there is a chance that, for example, Kyiv will take some steps to disrupt such a meeting?
Let's, first of all, I also join or return yours to you. Well, I'm not returning it for good, but I reciprocate your congratulations. Thank you. I congratulate you on the upcoming holidays, and I would like to say that again. Let's divide your question. Given that there were several theses made, in principle, it makes sense to comment on everything related to contacts between the heads of state of Russia and the United States, official, diplomatic, and so on, after the completion of the transit process, after the inauguration, after the relevant official appointments are made. This is the first thing. Secondly, you will understand that every day the Kyiv regime, being absolutely not independent, is commissioned by those who pump money through it, who supply weapons, who are interested in continuing or even escalating the crisis, and carry out terrorist acts. For what? In order to either influence those who advocate a political and diplomatic settlement, or cross out those peace initiatives that are being put forward, or simply intimidate those who express a point of view different from, so to speak, this very outgoing administration, Biden, and so on.
точку зрения, отличную от, так сказать, вот этой самой администрации уходящей Байдена.
After all, this happens every day and every terrorist act. It takes the lives of citizens and destroys civilian infrastructure, and at the same time, it also hits the aspirations of those who see peace as their main goal. It's just not necessary to associate it with contacts only. Yes, possible, future ones.
Просто не надо это связывать с контактами только, да, возможными.
We will discuss this later. It's already happening. Look, for example, there the official Budapest speaks out in favor of, so to speak, some peace initiatives, immediately followed by the most aggressive rhetoric of this inadequate Zelensky, immediately followed, so to speak, by the corresponding terrorist acts, of course, reinforcement of this most aggressive position. And as for example, the same fits, so he himself became the object of an assassination attempt, an attack. Here's another real example of what you're talking about. Yes, the Kyiv regime, by committing acts of tourism, influences everyone, wants to influence, who speaks out against the escalation of the conflict, who speaks out in favor of a political and diplomatic solution, settlement, and so on. Why? Because those interested in escalation are those who pay Zelensky money directly or pump it through him, who created him, brought him to power, who forbade him to negotiate with Russia, who, so to speak, did not allow him, or took Ukraine out of the negotiating table, and who needs not the prosperity of Ukraine, but who needs to use Ukraine for their own purposes.
I see. And we still have the second question. Well, there are literally a few days left until the new year. And according to Vitium, more than a third of Russians, if they wrote a letter to Santa Claus this year, they would ask for Russia's victory as soon as possible in a special military operation. We want to ask you, Maria Vladimirovna, and if you were writing a letter to Santa Claus, what would you ask him for?
You know, there is a certain ambiguity in your question here. Of course, all desires and aspirations are connected with what you are talking about. Victory, peace. But since you are addressing me in an official capacity, I can tell you that Russia, our state, is not asking for victory. We are bringing it closer. But if you ask for something, so to speak, from heaven, then strength and blessings in achieving this goal. Our goals have been defined, tasks have been set, formulated, and we are bringing them closer. And you know it.
Thank you very much for the answers.
Thank you. Is a leading TV channel with us?
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. I will also join my colleagues from the entire Channel 1. We congratulate you on your birthday.
Thank you very much.
The Arab world respects you very much.
Thank you very much.
This is the result of your professional activity and undying love for Russia. I wish you health and strength to continue your hard work to protect Russia and its interests in the world.
Thank you very much. I wish you, as a person who understands all the difficulties and the region and peoples of the Middle East, represented by you in your journalistic capacity, I wish you strength, patience, and courage in overcoming these challenges. As we have already said today, these are long-term challenges, and this is a zone, this is a territory, this is a region that, unfortunately, has become a concentration of a large number of unscrupulous ambitions, and the suffering that these malicious, unscrupulous interests of ambitions have brought to the peaceful citizens of the region is difficult to even compare with something. Therefore, strength, patience in overcoming.
Thank you. Question.
Yes.
The Israeli authorities in the occupied territories in southern Syria are forcibly forcing the local population to declare their desire to join Israel. What is Russia's position regarding these actions and the occupation of Syrian lands? Given the fact that the territories are already occupied, to are concerned about the surrounding territory of the Canadian Heights.
Yes, I have already heard it somewhere, that people are forcibly forced to become someone's citizens, that people are forcibly forced to give up, so to speak, belonging to one or another nationality, to one or another culture. When people are forcibly forced to give up even their native language, and because it is impossible, they will resmear the language. I've heard that somewhere before, and someone literally writes the same script, which is applied in different regions of the world. We have given assessments. They are fundamentally about the participation of so-called external players in the partition of Syria, in the seizure of its territory. We proceed from the need to preserve the unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian state, and we call on all responsible members of the international community to strictly follow this approach. We proceed from the fact that the collapse of Syria would be a serious challenge to the security of its neighboring countries and the Middle East region as a whole, by the way, with long-term and beyond the region consequences. This cannot be allowed to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Whether the tape is with us, Ru.
Yes, an amber place.
Yes, hello.
Hello. Hello. First of all, of course, I join.
Oh, thank you.
Managing colleagues.
Well, just some kind of second birthday. Thank you.
Here, of course, I would like to wish, first of all, health and perseverance. Our difficult time, you need them all the more. There is such a question, or rather there are several questions, but I will start with this. In addition to previous questions about possible contacts with the Trump administration, earlier Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov stated that several countries have already offered to host talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump after he took office as US president, and in this regard the issue is being worked out. Is the Russian Foreign Ministry hypothetically considering the possibility of a preliminary meeting of Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov with the future US Secretary of State, presumably this is Mark Rubio? And is such a possibility being worked out? And how, in general, the ministry treats Rubio's candidacy as the future, probably the head of the State Department?
You know, we have repeatedly, today even mentioned and talked about this topic, up to the official appointment of the foreign policy team and the globally new US administration. Of course, the inauguration of the President of the United States of America. Any comments about contacts, negotiations, so to speak, some kind of, I do not know, building relations. They are premature. They are simply inappropriate, because this is a generally accepted diplomatic practice. This is the first thing. Secondly, as for specific candidates, well, once again, it is the prerogative of the country, the people, and the president elected by the people of the relevant state to make such appointments. Accordingly, there is nothing to comment on here either. When these appointments are made, again taking into account the fact that they are sovereign, then we will be able to address this topic, as it were.
All right. Then I will proceed with your permission to the next question. Actually, on December 19th, Vladimir Putin said that he was ready to discuss the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine with Volodymyr Zelensky if he proved his legitimacy during the presidential elections and the corresponding vote. The question is, which of Kyiv's representatives does the foreign ministry consider as possible participants in negotiations in the event of a peaceful resolution of the conflict? And are Moscow considering options for negotiations with other representatives of the Ukrainian authorities in the event of Zelensky's refusal to hold elections?
You know, the question here is a little broader. To put it mildly, a little broader than just naming names, positions, or something else. Why? Because the situation is much more complicated. Well, first of all, I wanted to draw your attention to today's interview of Sergey Lavrov to Russia One channel on the program 60 Minutes of Evgeny Popov, Olga Skobeva, where he in particular spoke on these topics. I would also like to remind you that Russia has never rejected the possibility of achieving the goal of a special military operation by peaceful political and diplomatic means, and the president of the country has repeatedly stated this, including during the direct line you mentioned. Before that, these were not just statements in the interviews of the president, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is a postulated approach of domestic foreign policy, including in the context of the situation around Ukraine. Real proposals for launching negotiations and getting out of the current situation were formulated in his initiative. I am referring to the initiative of the President of Russia, which he announced on June 14th here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of our country. But the Kyiv regime just did not demonstrate interest in ending the conflict. And it's not about the Ukrainian people. It's about those who were brought as authorities to govern the Ukrainian people, but were led by Westerners. We do not see any positive changes in the rhetoric of the Kyiv regime. All the actions of the Ukrainian leadership indicate a lack of political will for peace. Zelensky's self-ban on negotiating with Russia remains in force, in the form of his decree of September of the 22nd year, not to mention the fact that after the expiration of his presidential term on May 21st, he is not a legitimate president. He has, so to speak, lost this very legitimacy, which, strictly speaking, follows from the Constitution of Ukraine. Accordingly, any agreements signed by him can be declared invalid by the Ukrainian country at any time. I have to remind you, although I think you know it, and why? Because it is legitimate to represent official Kyiv at international negotiations. The legitimacy that remains in accordance with the Ukrainian Constitution. Well, as experts believe, I emphasize once again, the Verkhovna Rada is not a thing postulated by us. This is what experts in Ukraine itself are talking about, including, however, after a direct line with the president on October 19th. Remember what the speaker of the Rada, Stefanchuk, said. He said that Kyiv is ready to negotiate only on its own terms. It's not a duet, you know, it's a solo. Negotiations cannot be on the terms of any party. I'm saying it again, then let them repeat it, as they repeated the mantras before, which led them to the cliff. Unfortunately, we, so to speak, saw this reaction. Unfortunately, for whom? Probably, first of all, for Ukraine itself, and the Ukrainians themselves, who, as you can see, even on the way to the Ukrainian military enlistment offices, are either shot, or those people who are trying to protect them are shot there. From our side, I just had to go back to the etymology of the questions again, repeat the whole story, because once again, this is not a question, yes. There is no specific position or surname. This is a question of what the Kyiv regime is stuck in this kind of swampy position. But it is clear why they have such a position. Because they are not independent, they do not rely on their national interests. They do not proceed from firm beliefs in their interest in the fate of the Ukrainian people. They just do it is on this shaky ground of allegedly Western support. Allegedly, so to speak, Western motivation. Of course, with an eye to future supplies of weapons and money. In other words, they once again demonstrate their inconsistency.
All right. Thank you. And if you can, such another question. The topic was touched upon Zelensky's statements to Fitz. How the foreign ministry regards Zelensky's statements about contacts between Moscow and Bratislava, especially taking into account Fitz's visit to Moscow, as well as taking into account Kyiv's statements about the transit of Russian gas through Ukraine, and their plan to stop it after the 1st of January.
Well, you are right to say that I have already commented on this. I just want to say that this is an inadequate reaction of an inadequate person who clings to power, I mean Zelensky, who is trying by hook or by crook to prolong his agony, respectively, the agony of his regime. That's exactly how it should be evaluated, in my opinion, which they also repeatedly talked about. So, is the messenger of the Caucasus with us?
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, hello.
We also join in the congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We write happy birthday and happy new year. We have one question. How does Russia feel about Ilham Aliyev's proposal to dissolve the OSCE Minsk Group? As he said in a recent interview with Dmitry Kiselyev.
You know, we have already commented on this, but given that the relevant statements have been made, so to speak, let's return to this topic. Let me just remind you that the Americans and the French, I mean their official delegates or their official representatives, special representatives, the Minsk Group co-chairs, stopped communicating with their Russian colleagues, with the Russian co-chairs in February of the 22nd year. They did it on their own initiative. Among other things, this is due to the termination of this communication and the recognition of Karabakh by Armenia as an integral part of Azerbaijan as a result of the Armenia-Azerbaijan European Union-France summit. Let me remind you, it was held in Prague on October 6th of the 22nd year, a radical change in the situation on Earth in September of the 23rd year, as well as the OSCE-approved mandate of the OSCE Minsk Conference co-chairs on the Nagorno-Karabakh regulation has lost its relevance. And it began simply with the blocking of the work of this format by the West. And then there were, so to speak, changes that took place, so to speak, in reality. Consequently, all the structures of the Minsk Conference, that is, the Minsk Group, the high-level planning group, the post of personal representative of the OSCE chairman in office on the Nagorno-Karabakh settlement, they are subject to dissolution. And we believe that the best way to make an appropriate decision in this regard is the joint proposal of Baku-Yerevan on the liquidation of these institutions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Lavrov is with us.
Yes, Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Hello.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Best wishes to you, as well as the tape. Ru, by the way, forgot to say best wishes. Happy holidays.
I have 3 questions today, Maria Vladimirovna. The first question. I would like to know your opinion about Turkey's actions in Syria. Yes, in connection with these issues, not only, which at first did not allow the radical Islamists and terrorists to be finished off, then helped them rearm, helped them overthrow Assad, and violated all their obligations to Russia, Iran, within the framework of the Astana format, and the continuation of this question. That's how it turns out that as a result of Turkey's actions in all regions where the Russian flag was developed for some reason, then the Turkish flag begins to develop. It was Karabakh, now Syria. Here I want to understand.
I didn't understand. The flag of Turkey is being developed by my grandfather besides Syria yet.
Well, in Karabakh, for example, in Shushi, in other places, somewhere.
There, let me remind you, as far as I understand, the flag of Azerbaijan is being developed in Karabakh.
Well, not only if you watch the video there.
In other words, do you agree with the flag of Azerbaijan on the territory of Karabakh? You don't want to ask yes. Is everything clear with this, as it were?
I am one of those citizens of Armenia who categorically disagree with what you have announced about the recognition of Nikol Pashinyan.
And I voiced, forgive me, not our attitude to this, but I voiced the attitude of the Armenian leadership to this issue. I voiced the decisions taken by the Armenian leadership on the recognition of Nagorno-Karabakh as the territory of Azerbaijan. You see how interesting it is. Here we are playing, here we are not playing. Here you are in a personal position of disagreement, and here you want to clarify the attitude of one country to the actions of the other side. What is all this for? In order to what? You'll forgive me, but really, except for working out some kind of registered number, I really don't see your sincere journalistic interest. The region is experiencing a tragedy. The tragedy has been restrained for many years by our armed forces and this country firm, so to speak, the degradation of the situation, and in the region as a whole. It's a tragedy now. Look at what's going on. And everyone is just trying to figure out how it would be possible and what would need to be done so that everything does not go into some kind of global peak at all. Do you understand? And you, so to speak, work with large strokes. I don't consider this a factual issue. I say again that it is necessary to characterize everything as a whole, as a tragic development of events, and we need to do everything to avoid, well, at least from our side. This has been done for all these years, but in order to avoid an escalation of the situation and its degradation.
I agree with you that Russia did everything so that there would be no escalation, but another country, specifically a country, did everything so that there would be an escalation.
Well, it seems to me that then these questions should be asked to another country.
The second question, Maria Vladimirovna. The other day, according to the order of Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, Russia will finance meals for Armenian school children at its own expense in the 24th and 28th years. In my opinion, there is an amount of more than $25 million, and this program, in my opinion, since 2000, Russia has been participating jointly with the UNWorld Food Program and the government of Armenia in the implementation of nutrition for Armenian school children. I would like to know how much has been spent on this program in general during this time, on feeding Armenian school children. And in general, are you planning other programs with the participation of Russia and the financing of assistance? Armenia.
You know, this program, as you correctly said, has been implemented since 2000. The National School Nutrition System, I mean programs to create and optimize it. The total amount of funds that our country has allocated, including funding for the period from the 24th to the 28th years, is more than $68 million, at the expense of Russian allocations. Primary school students receive more than 1,000 schools with high quality and balanced nutrition. For example, solar panels have been installed in almost 100 schools, having been erected due to energy savings. This is about $390,000, which are directed to the development of school infrastructure and, again, improving the nutrition of students within the framework of the World Food Program. In addition to providing assistance to schools in Armenia, Russia is actively using the potential of other organizations of the UN system. And we regularly talk about this in the context of other countries as well. The UN Development Program promotes the development of rural regions of the country, natural tourism, strengthening and creating jobs for young people, increasing Armenia's resilience to climate change, overcoming the consequences of COVID, and since the 21st year, a project has been launched to assist the most affected areas in post-conflict reconstruction. Housing is provided within the framework of these programs. Support is provided to agricultural producers. The reintegration of combatants is carried out, and in cooperation with UNICEF, Russia is working to improve the efficiency of providing basic services, providing permanent care, and supporting children and adults with disabilities until, at the expense of Russia, it implements initiatives to increase the competitiveness of export-oriented industries. This is absolutely not a complete list, so to speak, only an indicative list of projects that are being implemented in Armenia, with Russian funding through international organizations, and other initiatives cover such key areas for the Armenian economy as transport, energy, environmental protection, so to speak, the fight against poverty, health protection, including the health of newborns, and the fight against HIV/AIDS.
Thank you very much.
But I think it was mentioned in your question that we are implementing similar plans with respect to other states. Yes, we regularly talk, including about school meals, using the example of our interaction with international organizations, in particular the UN system, in the context of countries, for example, Central Asia.
And, Maria Vladimirovna, considering that the new year is just a few days away, what I want from you is what would you wish Armenia, the Armenian people in the 25th year?
It seems to me that first of all it is necessary to proceed from the fact that the leadership of our country has sent New Year's greetings to the leaders of the Transcaucasian countries, including Armenia, and there are wishes there, and considering that we are talking about contacts like this in the context of the upcoming holidays, between the heads of state and government, everything is set out there from state to state. Well, just like every fraternal nation, and the Armenian people, of course, are fraternal people, so I wish all residents of the South Caucasus well-being, peace, prosperity, and overcoming the challenges of existing peace. But these are, of course, wishes that go beyond only one region. I would like to wish peace to everyone. This is sincere, from the bottom of my heart, and believe me, it has been suffered. And if we speak in applied terms, translating into diplomatic language, then, of course, Russia, as before, is ready to provide worldwide assistance. The Armenian-Azerbaijani normalization promotes economic and transport connectivity, the establishment of trust and mutual benefit relations in the region, through a number of measures that have already been outlined and that need to be implemented.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Best wishes. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. All the best. So, Lisa Moscow Post is with us. Yes, hello. On behalf of our publication, I would also like to congratulate all those present and those who remain behind the scenes on the upcoming new year. Let there be only good news in life. Well, and you, Maria Vladimirovna, I would like to congratulate you separately on your last birthday. Thank you. All the best to you too. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. Best wishes. Thank you. And we have one question today. The United States urged its citizens to urgently leave the territory of Belarus. How do you qualify this? According to one version, Belarus is allegedly threatened by a coup d'etat. According to another, the AFU may be planning another terrorist attack and make their way to the territory of Russia through Belarus. You know, we characterize this next statement, similar to the one given earlier by the United States, as a provocation. This is not the first such statement by the US State Department. Washington issued similar so-called warnings, for example, in August of the 23rd year. This is a favorite tactic. They use it to escalate tensions, to make certain or veiled threats on the eve of important, primarily electoral processes in those countries that, so to speak, have not sworn to them, or to influence elections, so to speak, in this way. And since January 26th of the 25th year, elections of the head of state have been scheduled in Belarus. The current president of the Republic of Belarus also takes part in them. And we do receive information that the so-called Western ones, I don't even know how to use the word democracy in the context of the West now, but they position themselves in this way. Democratization funds, which are closely linked to Western intelligence agencies, are developing such a powerful propaganda campaign, powerful in terms of scale, because these are not some one-time actions. For what? To stimulate protest moods in Belarus. They are also increasing support for the fugitive Belarusian opposition, which, I remind you, has repeatedly called on the West to act against the citizens of Belarus. It's necessary to get to such a point that they beg for sanctions against their own citizens, but harder. And against this background, the aforementioned statement of the US State Department is an attempt to destabilize the situation in the Republic. I think it also confirms Washington's already well-established policy of interfering in the internal affairs of Belarus, striving to overthrow the legitimate authorities in this country. All these throw-ins, I think they are, so to speak, their instrument for stimulating the corresponding anti-state sentiments. And we regard the socio-political, socio-economic situation in Belarus as stable. The authorities ensure a high level of security, law and order, systematic explanatory work with the population, modernization of the political structure within the framework of the constitutional reform have led to a significant decrease in the protest potential in society, finding, so to speak, mutual understanding between the authorities and constructively minded socio-political forces. But these, as they call themselves, are political emigrants, but, in fact, people who just actively called for Western actions against the citizens of Belarus. They have now settled in neighboring countries with Belarus, such as Poland, the Baltic states. They have completely discredited themselves by this. They have not lost their authority. Well, you know, they have lost credibility, not even in the eyes of their compatriots, even in the West, so to speak. They are perceived as traitors. I would very much like to wish that the elections in Belarus were held in a calm atmosphere, but at the same time, against the background of the failure of efforts to shake up the Belarusian society from the inside, new attempts by the West, including through the armed forces controlled by him and the armed forces, and, so to speak, these gangs on the bank, to implement some kind of adventure in Belarus, maybe of various kinds, kind of an adventure, including a military one. We see these aggressive statements from the State Department and other structures. And once again, we want to remind both Western strategists and Ukrainian wards that the interstate agreement on security guarantees within the framework of the Union State, signed by the presidents of Russia and Belarus on December 6 in Minsk, contains a wide list of mutual obligations to ensure defense, to protect the sovereignty, independence, and constitutional system of Russia, Belarus, the integrity and inviolability of the territory and the external border of the Union State. To do this, the available forces and means will be used, including those designated in accordance with the new edition of the Fundamentals of the State Policy of the Russian Federation in the field of nuclear deterrence. Everyone should carefully read this document. It was approved on the 19th of November. During the signing ceremony, it was also announced that an agreement had been reached on the deployment of Oreshnik missile systems on the territory of Belarus in the second half of the 25th year, with the right of Minsk to independently determine targets. In other words, Russia will provide its ally with all the necessary assistance in establishing both in eliminating both internal and external threats. Attempts to implement any aggressive scenarios against Minsk are fraught with the most harmful consequences for both performers and organizers. Thank you. Rudiv TV channel is with us. Yes, we are with you. Mrs. Zakharova, first of all, let me wish you a happy birthday and wish you all the best. Thank you, and all the best for the upcoming holidays. I have a question. It is related to Syria. Some countries are building relations with the new Syrian government, and someone has already decided to open their embassies there. Russia has already taken steps in this regard. Will you open your embassy there already? Will you build relationships with them? There was some misunderstanding. Maybe you watched some fake news. But Russia did not change the status of its representation in Syria. Our embassy in Damascus continues to function. It has not stopped its work. This is to the question, to yours. Is this the answer to your question? Is Russia planning to open an embassy? We have an embassy there. Are you already building your relationship with them? We have repeatedly said that Russia maintains contacts with all forces, political forces, with all active forces that openly declare their position. We have talked about this many times. I can confirm this again. So let's go on with us is the publication author, and thank you.
Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Allow me, on behalf of our friendly team, on my personal behalf, to raise this glass to your health, to your beauty. To hand over the same fervent, strong.
We haven't had this yet, but so to speak, the trouble has begun.
You don't need to change anything about yourself. I congratulate you.
Yes.
Happy New Year.
Yes. Best wishes to you too. I wish you all the best, and every prosperity in the new year.
Thank you very much, thank you. Let's hope that the year will be more gentle with us all than the outgoing ones. You have already said about Latvia and its behavior, I would say about bestial behavior. I'm not even going to look for any other synonyms, because there is, of course, no politics there. It is unbearably painful when the shelter is in the backs of our veterans. Our children and the elderly are being bullied. But not even so much from myself, although, of course, as a citizen of this country of Latvia, I still remain, well, I hope, that I will soon be our compatriot. In general, firm our compatriots who stayed not only in Latvia, but also in the Baltic countries. Why are we still not using the entire arsenal of diplomatic and administrative tools, but if not suppression, but at least opposition to this non-Nazi one, we are building it on linguistic genocide, of course. I read the tape with pain when I see that again we have reports that exports to Russia from these countries, it increases again. It has already increased by only 65% this year. It would still be logical if we sell something, but by firm our outspoken geopolitical enemies. Well, somehow.
So I will answer your question in blocks, although it is more like a claim. The first one is about actions. It's not just a statement. It's not just press releases. Let me remind you that we have a state program in place to assist the voluntary resettlement of compatriots living abroad to the Russian Federation, profile organizations of the Russian civil society, associations of lawyers of Russia, international associations of Russian-speaking lawyers, play a huge role and are of great importance. This is a truly unique human rights mechanism, the Fund for the Support and Protection of the Rights of Compatriots Living Abroad. This is the first one. Second, we will use all available international judicial mechanisms against unfriendly states that systematically discriminate against Russian compatriots. In particular, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination of 1965 year opens up opportunities for this. Pre-trial claims have already been filed by Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia in connection with the gross violation of the rights of Russians, contrary to the said convention. We have reported this repeatedly and talked about it publicly. And so at the briefing on October 30th, in connection with the situation around the Morozev family, who were forced to flee Latvia because of the so-called derussification policy pursued by the authorities of this country. And this is just deisification. This is a discriminatory defeat in the rights of a large part of the Russian population by denying citizenship and issuing so-called passports. Citizens. This is the total elimination of education in the Russian language. It's washing out of all spheres of public life, forcibly, against the will of people. This is the formation of the image of Russians in the public consciousness as such an allegedly internal enemy. This is harassment. This is prosecution on far-fetched charges of any public figures who advocate the obvious. This is the Russian language. This is culture. This is nationality. This is the persecution of ordinary people who do not want to give up their identity. They refuse to believe Russophobic mantras, who do not want, so to speak, seeing all the incompetence and all the anti-right humanity. Even this seems to me to be a term that can be used to become under the banner of the ideology of Russophobia, well, in particular about the Baltic countries we are talking about. This is finally the glorification of Nazism. Criminals from the Waffen-SS, other accomplices of Hitler in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, are presented as almost national heroes. You already know such demigods, you understand. Streets are named in their honor, monuments are erected, celebrations are held, school textbooks are full of their photos. By the way, monuments are being erected to these unfinished SS men, and at the same time monuments to Soviet wars and fighters against Nazism are being demolished throughout the Baltic states. People celebrating Victory Day are subjected to real punitive measures. Nothing will be let down, nothing will be forgotten. The Baltic authorities will have to answer for all this. The list of unfriendly countries against which legal claims will be made for discrimination against Russians, I assure you, will not be limited only to the Baltic states. We will give exhaustive comments in due time, but believe me, this work is underway. The second block is economic countermeasures. The sanctions imposed on Russia have had a negative impact on almost all sectors of the economy of the Baltic states. And, as you understand, these are measures that were introduced in response. The most tangible losses are borne by the transport and logistics transit industry, which once generally had the status of the budget-forming or budget-forming spheres in this country. Today, as a result of a sharp reduction in public procurement from Russia and Belarus, many enterprises in the transport sector, primarily in Latvia and Lithuania, are on the verge of ruin. It's not our choice. We just answer. A year ago, the total amount of uncovered losses of the state railway company of the Latvian Railway was 47 million euros. The company has been making massive layoffs of more than 2,000 employees for several years now. A similar situation is observed with the air carrier Baltic. Financial losses for the first half of the 24th year amounted to over 80 million euros. This company is also facing bankruptcy. I emphasize once again, we were just charged with interaction. We are neighbors. We have a common history that contains more good than problematic, and all problematic could be overcome. We wanted to develop from a public, so to speak, message to private business and specifically citizens who wanted to have real estate and small businesses, and just communicate with the residents of these countries. Without these endless aggressive, barbed wire obstacles, political barbed wire. But no, the Baltic states have become a testing ground for anti-Russian, Russophobic, as the West says, narratives. Therefore, we began to respond. And against the background of the rejection of Russian energy carriers in the Baltic states, an unprecedented increase in utility tariffs and transportation is being recorded. There is a catastrophic decline in the standard of living of the population, and all this forces residents to look for a better life outside the Baltic states. That is, people are simply washed out of there. In recent years, about a quarter of the population has left. Banks and restaurants are closing in Latvia Abkhazia, the tourist flow has sharply decreased. If you think it gives me pleasure to say it all, then only in one context, that we finally answer. But at the same time, we are well aware that there should have been another way. But, unfortunately, the Baltic states did not use it, and not people in the Baltic states. We are not taking these rabid nationalists or just crazy. We are talking about the population of the whole country, who have different political views, but they certainly were not going to live in hostility with their compatriots, with people who share a common history, who wanted to use all the opportunities that Russia gives, its resources and its, I don't know, culture, history, potential, and so on. And at the same time, develop relations with Western neighbors. But they were simply turned away from it, so to speak, forcibly turned away. By the way, the once lively old Riga, as they say themselves, I'm quoting Latvian politicians now, it has become like a cemetery. Once again, not my quote, I'm quoting those who live there. And you remember how many Russians came to the same New Year holidays. And what does it mean to come to another country? This is also, the hotel business in this country is rising. The tourist potential is developing. These are restaurants. These are public places connected with culture and history. This is a natural, friendly inflow of investments. This is not aggression. This is exactly the kind of interaction in the humanitarian sphere, on the humanitarian track, which everyone only dreams of, and this Baltic saw from us. And then it started. Then they don't give visas. Then they enter top lists. Then they take away real estate. Then they just start poisoning, so to speak. Then something there that just wasn't there anymore. This is not only true of Russian citizens, but also of their own citizens, not only non-citizens, but even those who have citizenship. What I haven't heard over the years. Yes, and now we are responding, and not a single unfriendly attack by Vilnius Riga Italina will remain without a proper response from our side. But in answer to your question, the third block, if you have a list or your subscribers, readers, audience have a list of those measures that could be taken, please pass it on to us.
Exhaustively, thank you very much to take advantage.
I tried.
You did it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second question, if I may, what do you think about the state and prospects of Russian-Abkhazian relations in connection with what is happening in this republic at the moment?
Look, Abkhazia is one of our closest allies due to close historical, political, economic, and socio-cultural ties. Our country continues to provide dry assistance in the sphere of security, socio-economic development, and other important areas, on the terms defined by numerous legal acts between our countries. Guided by humanitarian considerations, Russia, in response to the official appeal of the acting president of Abkhazia, decided on the socio-social flow of electricity to Abkhazia from December 23rd to the end of February 25th year. This was done taking into account the crisis situation in the energy sector of the Republic, provoked, among other things, by the deterioration of local networks, uncontrolled mining of cryptocurrencies, well, in general, a well-known problem. And at the same time, it is obvious that allied relations presuppose a balance of mutual obligations, and we proceed from the fact that Sukhumi will go its part of the way in accordance with the aforementioned contractual documents, including with regard to the harmonization of legislation, the creation of the necessary conditions for Russian investment, and so on. And we know that there is a broad demand in the Abkhazian society to strengthen the alliance with Moscow, and we hope that following the results of the early presidential elections, which, let me remind you, are scheduled in Abkhazia for February 15th of the 25th year, a leader will be elected, who will continue working closely with our country on the progressive development of Abkhazia and bilateral relations.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year again, and
Happy holidays. All the best. Is the voice of the fatherland with us. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Hello. He welcomes you, continuing your holiday from the Day of the Heart. I wish you many glorious years. Stay firm to drive for the fatherland. Thank you. Best wishes to you too. Happy holidays, and all the best in the new year. Thank you very much. Today we have such a question. How do you assess the work of the United Nations today as a guarantor of compliance with the basic principles of international relations, defined by the Charter and other legal documents, in the context of the armed conflict with Ukraine? Is the world community capable of adequately perceiving events and making important decisions within the UN on issues that are periodically raised at Security Council meetings by Permanent Representative Vitaly Alexievich Nebenzia and Foreign Minister Sergey Viktorovich Lavrov? You know, it seems to me that it is necessary to leave the corners of the question again. Everyone talks about the crisis of the United Nations. Few people talk about the root causes. As much as it is possible not to see, I am not appealing to you now, but in principle, as much as it is possible not to notice the reason that blocks the functioning of the United Nations. This is monopolization with the West of the entire personnel situation in the United Nations Secretariat. The agenda, well, in this case, the last 2.5 years, there have literally been Ukrainization of every issue. Whether or not it is connected with the regional situation, with international security, it does not matter. It all starts with words about Ukraine. At the same time, for 8 years, no one had noticed any problems in the form of the murder of civilians in the Donbas, violation of human rights. No one noticed the refusal in the basic needs of a person, the need to live, not survive, get an education, and maybe even start with food, wages, or social benefits to which people were entitled or earned them, and so on, and so on. No one has uttered the word Ukraine from the West for 8 years at the specialized sites of the same United Nations organization. And when this question was raised by Russian representatives, as you probably remember, many of them were threatened with the fact that we have no right to allegedly raise these topics. Therefore, I have told you only 2 points from the crisis phenomena. This is, so to speak, a complete firmware with the West of the personnel of the UN Secretariat, the placement of people in all positions, so to speak, who carry out only one Western, not even Western, but such an aggressively pro-NATO idea of domination in the world. In other words, so to speak, the Anglo-Saxons should be at the head, and through their instruments, institutions, they should subordinate everyone to their influence, and generally subordinate everyone, and build a world order not based on international law, but on their own rules, and in particular, the Ukrainization of the agenda. That's all. These are just 2 points out of the problems that the West has created for the United Nations, not anyone else and nothing else. I'm sorry, if the world community was able to come up with such an organization for us, the Great Patriotic War, even during the hungry, cold, monstrous years immediately after the war, when, excuse me, one of the urgent tasks was to bury people. Remember how they buried them along the roads? Yes, they just fell asleep in the pits, because there was no way to adequately give the earth. It's just that one of the main tasks was simply not to find people, but to bury those who found them. Here is the task level, and under these conditions, the United Nations was created for such a complex one. Its headquarters was rebuilt, and all countries sent delegates. Well, there is probably an opportunity now to prevent its collapse after all. Can you imagine what we're talking about? They created it in the most difficult years, and in the years when, in general, the world, so to speak, Well, at least a few years ago, this wave or a parade of crises did not overwhelm it. They could not protect it from the influence of the West so destructive that they practically blocked it. Here, they have not destroyed it yet, but they have certainly managed to block constructive work of full-format quality. That's the root cause, you understand, from the fact that, in my opinion, I have already given this example. If the bike does not ride, it does not mean that it is broken. Perhaps, first, someone is not pedaling, and perhaps there is an iron pond inserted into the wheels. In the antipode, pedal, the bike will go. He is a mechanism, he is a tool. We need to use it properly, which Russia always calls for, and we need to stop putting sticks in the wheels. Moreover, this is already a destructive phenomenon. This is not just a hindering phenomenon, but a destructive one for the international community and for the United Nations. Is the world community capable of responding adequately and realizing, as you asked? Of course, the world majority, of course. Someone has the opportunity to resist the West. Someone, I mean in a national capacity, someone lacks these opportunities. So to say, here you are, please, an example of the Middle East, we have repeatedly analyzed today. But there is no other way. Otherwise everyone will be enslaved again. Otherwise there will be an era again. Well, in this case neocolonialism, do you understand? But many people have an adequacy in assessing the situation, even within the Western camp. Yes, people are not just persecuted for this, as it was a few years ago. People are being killed for it. You look at the assassination attempt on Fitz. Look at the assassination attempt on other political figures. Look at how Ukraine has been made a terrorist state, which is carrying out a series of terrorist attacks on the European continent and on other continents. Yes, this is already a question posed like this with the West, but we must resist. And the assessments are appropriate, adequate, and are given by the world majority, and even already inside, as I said, the nation-centric countries. And our position is well known to you. Thank you very much. Together we will stand. So, goodbye. Thanks. Best wishes. So, is the embassy life with us?
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
Yes, well, on behalf of the editorial board, I personally congratulate you on your birthday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Best wishes too. Here we are, not so long ago. You started connecting to us, but, in my opinion, this led us to a mutually beneficial story.
Thank you very much. And to the question. Letters from the Director General of UNESCO, the Russian media demanded that the organization stop suppressing the facts of violations of the rights of Russian journalists. The letters were written in light of the absence in the draft UNESCO report on the safety of journalists of mention of a number of facts of death and injury by representatives of the Russian media in the course of performing their professional duties. Is there any reaction to these letters from the UNESCO Directorate?
As you know, I saw the reaction from the UNESCO Directorate only within the framework of the PERC meeting. Zul herself did not appear there. Its representatives appeared, who were forced to react to this onslaught. Another thing is that her powers expire, her tenure in this position ends, so to speak. Therefore, it is already necessary to see how the new CEO will act. But it seems to me that this signal has passed, because, as you correctly said, not only our country reacted, a lot of delegates reacted within the framework of the IPERC format and countries at the level of intermediaries, and in Paris at UNESCO, and national media corporations in various countries and unions of journalists. A lot of people expressed support for the rejection of this report, in support not only of Russia's position, because we have good relations and so on, but because such neglect, such segregation of journalists into right and wrong, on those who are supposed to be mentioned in case of death, and on those who are not even mentioned after the murder, so to speak, when listing the murdered representatives of the media. That's what caused their outrage and rejection. That's why they supported us. It seems to me that this signal has passed.
Thank you. And the second question. As you promised, the wish is diplomatic to our and foreign, that is, with January. I would like to hear from you personally.
You know, more and more people on planet Earth are making a choice in favor of wishing peace to themselves, loved ones, each other, and in general to all of us. What does this mean? It seems to me that this speaks about a very important thing. We have become less selfish. Yes, through such monstrous trials, through problems that, in general, we thought we would never meet on our life path, given that our ancestors already paid a considerable price. Perhaps in this way, but we have become less selfish. We think not only about what is important to each of us, and now I'm talking about people in different parts of the world. I read what they write, I hear what they say, I see what they are trying to express. Many people, and these people more and more, want peace for everyone and understand that this is the basic value. More and more people are wondering that not only their personal desires or wishes should prevail, but it is important that wishes for good, well-being, peace, love, and prosperity are addressed to as many people as possible. Because this is the strength and the guarantee that it will come true, even in its individual plan. That's what I want. I wish both peace, and that the wish for peace concerns each of us, and by expressing it, we would draw it to the whole planet, so that it was not just selfish, but also universal. And of course, I wish us in our country and our people a victory, which, as I have already said, we are bringing closer. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you. A holiday.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays. But I seem to have said everything in these words, but I also wish you, given your really very difficult mission today, because journalism is still not even a profession anymore. It's some kind of dangerous mission that endangers life and well-being. I wish you patience, strength, and an ongoing desire to defend the truth. Happy holidays. Thank you.
And the same for you.
Thank you. Goodbye.